Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, "I'll talk to my AIPAC person," and it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to, dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
It doesn't benefit anybody. Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Sunday, March 2nd, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. It's good to be back. I've been under the weather, dealing with God knows what, but I'm definitely feeling better, so I'm happy to be back to kind of get back into everything. At first, I was really trying to keep up on a lot of it, but it was it worked out to kind of be a dual kind of mental break for me as well, to where I kind of just put things aside for the last couple of days and just, clear my head, which I'm glad I did. So I'm still feeling a little odd, but I'm happy to be back, and I'm going to, you know me, I can't let this stuff sit. It drives me crazy. So I wanted to get caught up on a lot of these different points that we've been discussing: the ceasefire in Gaza, the conversation has evolved, the Biba's family dynamic, and sadly, as a lot of anybody honest and paying attention was predicting, the violation of violation is a bad word, seeing as how Israel's violated the ceasefire pretty much every day since this started, pretty much the same as Lebanon, but the breaking of the ceasefire as planned. It's one of these moments where, again, it's demonstrating our value, and it's not just TLAV. There's a lot of people out here that were saying it because it was that clear. Trump gave them this deal. At least that's what Israel's own government was proudly, openly saying in different conversations, that they were allowed to break it right at this moment. The Biba's family played a part in that, but there was other dynamics we're going to get to that allowed this to at least give the illusion of some kind of justification. It's like it's been every other time before. And it's sad to see that we were right about that, because we paid attention. And if you looked, you saw it too. It was very clear. It was all planned out. And I think it's pretty much along with everything else that seems to be happening right now. Now, we're going to start with an interesting point. Shout out to Strategic Culture Foundation for both the image we used as well as the article we're going to touch on to start, which I kind of jokingly coined the Doge deep state, or the deep Doge state. Funny enough, by the way, on a side note, which you'll see a few times today, for some reason I had some of the things I put out today were a little bit cheeky, or a little bit, ironic, or rather sarcastic. And it's just funny the way people respond. I swear, Twitter, the internet truly killed sarcasm. There's a few different things today that I'm going to laugh about that I just don't think people just can't seem to get out of the internet dynamic of things today, but a couple of jokes that we'll talk about and different things we said. But it's important to see an important point coming out of all of this in regard to, and you'll see what I just said there made sense as we go through some of the things today. I don't want to dive into it to start, but important to see back to the point about Doge and the concerning dynamic around that. And that's why I mentioned the article we're going to talk about, as they frame it essentially as this, like, to kind of paraphrasing their title, is this just not the deep state, or a new deep state, or however you want to look at it, based on what we understand it's supposed to be. Now, I encourage, we should always question and push back on ideas. Don't blindly accept anything, including from what you already think might be the case. But as always, consider what they're putting out. Consider the points they're making about whether this is functionally exactly what we've been fighting. Even if it's the people, even if they are actually the people that you think they are. Doesn't it not still represent the same kind of consolidation of power? That, yes, I mean, in very obvious ways, but the conversation we've had more than once, maybe in a broken system, that's the only way to fight out. I mean, I'm always willing to consider these arguments, but as always, it's about the outcome, right? Where does it end up? What happens tomorrow? What happens at the end of a year? What happens at the end of 4 years? What happens when a new administration comes in? Is that even on the table anymore? We should be considering all these. And I get the sense that most people are as confused as ever, especially in the partisanship, definitely see the problem. But that's going to be an important thing that carries over, and the obvious overlap with one of the things I've been most concerned with is regard to the ethics pledges and the different obvious conflicts of interest and the many different kind of opaque dynamics around most of this administration, all of which are just like, can't stop fighting to be the first one to scream how important Israel is and how the first phone call they make and the first trip they make more than once before we even talk about America concepts. I don't know how anybody could miss this right now. That's just me. And as usual, you get the grifters out there that I think try to emulate the genuine independent media, already rushing to get documentaries out to be out. It's always, in my opinion, the main thing we're seeing today is the carefully crafted deception using truth. I mean, it's everywhere. It's always been there. Just my opinion, obviously, but I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of people out there. One big point we'll make today who are using things that are either already being seen, sort of like what I think is the shtick of the current administration, using the things we already thought we wanted or that we saw failing and wanted to stop, and then acting like they're changing it. And really, they're just shuffling in the new thing they already had planned. That's my opinion, of course. The evidence backs it up. But the interesting point being that I think a lot of people out there in this mainstream alternative media are using things they see that we already recognize and trying to co-opt that movement. It happens all the time. And in many cases, just trying to hide what is the most important central part of it by showing you, yes, we see this, but it's over there and it's not Israel, for example, or it's not Trump that's involved or Biden or whoever is in that current seat. It's about trying to deviate from that truth. And we're going to talk about that and important, that it's all the current power structure is trying to put you in a place to where your awareness of what they are no longer matters. That's my opinion. A bird flu point that I think is very important we're going to get to, just a development on that story, trying to get caught up on some of these. Of course, the Epstein conversation we're going to touch on, as well as a brief point about the Zelenskyy meeting. Not a lot of attention on that because just still trying to get caught up, but I want to ultimately focus on what I think is most important. And some of these theater shows going on today don't scream what is immediately what's most relevant to what's currently happening. Not to say that I couldn't spin out into 100 different things, but it's about what I think is currently, going to have the most effect on what's happening. The Epstein part is really important because of how clear this is. It's another extension of another lie, it's the same thing that happened last time. And we'll go into all of it, question it as usual, left, nonpartisan style, not left or right, but really that all of your government seems to be constantly trying to get you thinking. And that's a good example of what I was just saying. Pretending that we have change because they yelled that we were going to do something and then it doesn't really materialize, but it's okay because we were already celebrating 3 days ago. It already kind of happened because they said they were going to. They'll get to it. Give them a chance. Just trust them. They might get there. It's crazy the kind of placation we get. But of course, an important overlapping point to that goes into the larger Israel conversation, as you might imagine, the easy connection there, but really showing you the Israel first nature of his cabinet and ending with the conversation of the ceasefire, which is just absurd. I mean, the idea that now not only are they claiming Hamas broke the ceasefire, which you can prove step by step that Israel had been violating it. But on top of that ultimately they were at a point where everything had been, at least they were at the same spot, right? Where there was no violation, anything, just yelled about something else and claimed that they wanted new things added to the agreement. And because they didn't want that, which in and of itself was a violation, you don't get to insert new things and claim that because they didn't accept what they demanded, that suddenly it's Hamas's fault. It's insane. And right now, on top of it, you can clearly see that they're going right back to what the plan was always going to be at the exact moment we told you it would happen. It's pretty obvious. And even worse, they stand up and say, no food, no water, no fuel. Oh, yeah, just like last time. Showing you that it's a switch. Not this game they play about how we don't have control over that. We're not occupying this territory. Then just like that, they can shut it down. Turn it off. No more. And at a point at which we're supposed to be of the mind that they killed most of Hamas, right? So now what's left objectively? Mostly civilians and their own hostages, right? So let's starve them all because they didn't give us what we want. Who? The group you're fighting or everybody that's in Palestine? This is why everybody sees through this. If there's any honesty in the world, people are acknowledging this is a criminal act, no matter what the truth is around it. And the truth is they've been lying about everything. So let's start, of course, with an interesting point around cryptocurrency that you might find interesting, and a few other opening points I think are relevant to include. This is an interesting point for multiple reasons. We've been talking about the cryptocurrency part in all this, the reserve, strategic reserve, and all of that. We've had many podcasts on it, a couple of different IMA panels. On that note, by the way, still waiting on the new website to come. We just touched base with Odyssey. It's just, these things take time, as we recently said, and you're building something new, essentially. So when it gets there, we'll present it to you. We're kind of in a holding pattern until we have something to place a lot of this. But more panels will be coming, by the way, just as an update. But we talked about a lot of this more than once. And the concern about what that might mean. Catherine Austin Fitts had a lot of very important perspectives on why this is not what it appears to be, and how really it's the same problem in a different. It's sort of like the stable coin private dynamic as opposed to the CBDC. You may go, yay, it's not a CBDC, until you realize the private version is far, far worse. And it's exactly the larger point we're always making, which very clearly seems to be happening. And if this plays a further part of it, even more obviously. But it's not just about where this goes. And the weird omission of the Bitcoin point, which I don't think is fleshed out yet. We'll have to wait and see what the response is, or whether it was just, I'll read it in the tweet or the truth that High Impact Flix shares. But before I get into that, the interesting point is what I wrote here. And I want you to really think about this. It certainly could just be that they have a different reason they do the same thing. Always ask questions, objective, question everything. But the continuity of so many different points around this. And this is just one example that show you, whether they're aware of it or not, there has been a continual agenda through a lot of these things that span back well before, from multiple left and right administrations. I simply wrote, how long has the genuine independent media called XRP Fedcoin? Now, it's a whole conversation, but it's obvious because of the way you could see that at this point, when this first kind of came out, XRP represented a very obvious, most of these things seem to be pushing back against the system in some way, at least ostensibly represented to be sort of a challenge to the current financial system, or a challenge to certain, mainstream functionality, because not all of them are currency necessarily. And this one just plugged right into the system. And so a lot of us were like, well, and it's much more complicated, but to make it simple, it just stood out as an example of what seemed to be not what everything else looked. It seemed to be like the Fedcoin, the one where they were trying to go, picture Steve Buscemi with his hat actually like, hey, fellow, whatever he says, kids at the high school, whatever that meme is from that movie. That's what XRP represented. Like, we're not totally just another cryptocurrency like you, kind of making it funny. But the point is that we were concerned. And we went through multiple administrations, and now Trump rolls it out as part of the reserve currency. And I simply said, believing it will be used just like this. So much that is happening today shows you the long-term continuity of the agenda through multiple admins, left, right, or simply known as your government. Now, as I'm saying this, I probably should have read this first, because those of you that haven't seen this might not know exactly what I'm referring to. That's my fault. So Donald Trump writes this, Truth Social, and it is exactly this. I didn't grab it today, I forgot, but you can grab this on Truth Social, which I usually grab for you. A U.S. crypto reserve will elevate this critical industry year after years of corrupt attacks by the Biden administration, which is why my executive order on digital assets directed the presidential working group to move forward on a crypto strategic reserve. In and of itself is an interesting, not necessarily has to be a bad thing, but rife with potential corruption and problems we've talked about. That includes XRP, SOL, SOL, and ADA. I think that's Cardano, and I'm blanking on the other one. Give me in the chat what the other name is. I just forget them. I usually go out, you can see the acronyms, but the point is, where's Bitcoin? Now it says includes, maybe he means those three, and that's what it is. Or it could simply be on top of Bitcoin. Either one, I think you could argue and kind of conversationally would make sense. So we'll have to wait and see. But even, I think it was, I think I got it right here. Bitcoin Magazine shared the same thing and said, just in, President Trump announces he's creating a crypto strategic reserve with no mention of Bitcoin. They do say no mention. So I think they get the same feeling, like we'll have to wait and see how this goes. But it is not a good, it's an indication it's going or potentially the wrong direction. Talk about a bait and switch. If they don't use Bitcoin, that's like spurning the entire Maha part of their administration right now. It's a whole separate dynamic within the Trump administration that is basically a part of it because of RFK Jr. So in the same way, there's a huge part of this that are people that believe that he would bring this golden era of cryptocurrency. He's using that same kind of thing everywhere. The golden age of this. and doesn't include it. So if it doesn't get included, man, what a bait and switch for people that were invested because of that. And on top of that, they already made millions just by the hype around Bitcoin. And I guarantee you, if you don't see it, that's what I had this for. Look at what happened today with XRP. And I think it's gone up from there. I think it's like 260, and it could have changed since I looked. If you knew about this before, I mean, minutes before, you could make billions. That's a huge jump. So I guarantee you, and I think that's what Brian says here, somebody did. He says, Trump just announced the creation of a crypto reserve. Crypto immediately pops, and certain ones, not all of them, wonder who made huge purchases before the announcement with their insider information. Now, you can find that out. In many cases, you can only see the actual anonymized aspect of who bought it, but in many ways, you can usually trace that back to somebody who has it publicly posted. For example, like I have mine posted on all my posts, but I'm aware of that. And I'm not trying to hide anything. That's why I do it, because whatever we get donated through that, you guys can look and see for yourselves. Hasn't been only that much over the years. Feel free to make that more. The point, though, is that in some ways, it's not always anonymized, depending on what it is. I'd love to find out who. And if somebody in his inner circle somehow made a lot of money off this trade, that's a big deal. So it's worth pointing out. So let me know what you guys find. I'm very interested to see in that. But overall, if XRP has always kind of been ready for this, and we've always seen that in the wings, and it just gets used at the right moment, obviously this seems to suggest this has been the plan through multiple administrations left and right. That needs to stand out. And let's wait and see if Bitcoin's included. Now, on that kind of general conversation, the AI overlap, which again, actually I should have grabbed those for you. I get two really good interviews recently on Bitcoin. One with, where is that? Mark Goodwin. And the other one with Mitch Hepburn, that's funny, Mitch Burcham. This one, Mark Goodwin, was Bitcoin a government operation and can't still be used to fight back? This one entitled, How the Government Commandeered Bitcoin and Its Decentralized Future. Both are really good, slightly different points in some aspects, largely the same idea that they both think it can still be used to fight back. And also in different ways, but the nuance I won't get into now. But the point is that this is interesting to think about, because Mitch in particular, we talk about the AI overlap to it, and Bitcoin as not the currency aspect of it, but the technology. There's ways that this can be used that overlap with artificial intelligence that are, like, he even argues, like, for example, and they even mentioned this in the past, like a carbon tracking dynamic. And it gets very dystopian the more you see this go forward. That's why he's very adamant about trying to fight against it. So Just a Thought points out a More Perfect Union post from the 27th, and this is from a piece of legislation. Republican Congressman David Schweikert has introduced a bill to begin the process of letting AI prescribe drugs. Now, this is all happening wildly fast. Now, this is what they meant, and if you can't see that by now, and they've told you this, they've been clear, they even said it explicitly. Someone like David Sachs for both AI and cryptocurrency, Elon Musk himself, that this is what they mean by efficiency, that they're going to use artificial intelligence on everything. That's been basically stated. And so here, we're just talking about prescribing drugs, or, you know where this goes. The logical conclusion is that everything you're interfacing, the government is AI. And somebody even made a point about this. Actually, I should have held back on this until this point we're going to get to in a second, but they're being very shadowy about what Doge is and who you can know and where the names are. And somebody made a good point. What if it's literally artificial intelligence? What if the actual administrator that we're not being named, or maybe it has been, I missed it, but I'll show you the clip of her acting like we're not going to tell you from this podium who the actual administrator is. What if they're just referring to an artificial intelligence program? Just a thought. Somebody else deserves credit for that, but that's a very alarming way to look at this. But even that aside, just the general idea of rushing into this in ways that we don't even understand yet, at least from the average person. Prescribing drugs, who's accountable for stuff like this? What if there's a problem? We have not even begun to map this out, and they're ramming it through. Now, it says, instead of investing in U.S. healthcare systems, the bill paves the way for doctors to be replaced by AI. Now, you may be okay with that. I'm not in any context, not especially because of the people, and I don't mean left or right. Our government, currently both sides of it, or all of your government, who do not care about our interests. And that's been transparently clear for decades. To then replace these dynamics with artificial intelligence, the point is, are they going to make sure it's safe for you? Are they going to make sure that these things are, it's all the same points. If we know that, or even the other point is the information they're using through artificial intelligence, right? If they're the ones entering in the data, well, then they can ultimately, like we're seeing with Elon Musk today, can ultimately control things through that. Something Whitten and I've talked about more than once. Now, Just AI or Just a Thought says we all be replaced by AI. Be forced to take universal basic income, of which Elon Musk has roundly supported, via stablecoins, and will be digitally controlled and tracked if we don't start paying attention to what's happening. That's obviously her opinion. It seems like a very unfortunately likely scenario with where this all goes. This is why I want to include it, though. She's a great post from her. But here, Donald Trump's first week in office, his administration has begun to demolish what the foundations for ensuring that artificial intelligence in the U.S. is safe and responsible. No, of course, because the moment I show you the source, certain people will reflexively dismiss it, and all of us should reflexively question it. And that's for everything, no matter where it comes from. Now, the ACLU, of course, has been very clearly politicized, without question. That doesn't change what you can understand about the root facts in this. Now, what you'll notice that I'll leave out the parts that they get into about the racial discriminatory points, even though they're valid. It doesn't mean all sides will use it for their own interest or what they think. But that's not the point for me. The point for me in this is about whether this is going to be used in ways that are, I'll read the article and you'll see what I mean. The obvious part of this is the woke aspect, if you want to call it that, which is fair. The idea of using this to effectively, from the Democrat perspective, they're worried that the AI will be used to make sure that only people they want will be in those positions. Whether you think that means a certain color or a certain whatever, there's some level of honesty to that, or man versus women. And now on the right, the idea is that they'd be more concerned that they would make sure it's all DEI and woke and lesbians and there's some truth to that too. That's what's interesting about it. Now, but that point aside, I'd like to believe that if we get to an honest place where you could make an AI program hypothetically that could make it the best for the job, somebody who has the most merit to be there. Now, you would need honest input for that to be the reality. But you see my point. I put that aside for a reason, because that's the article really focuses on the idea of how this could be used to discriminate against people. For me, I'm more concerned about the privacy dynamic or there's so many ways to look at how this could get out of control. The article is simply Trump's effort to dismantle AI protections. Now, again, aside from the, just the left-right perspective, at a point in which artificial intelligence is rolling out faster than ever, why would you roll back things that are not about left and right, but just simply protection of people in a system in which AI is rolling out? It's a good question. Now, I'm going to include these articles in here we talked about from the Bitcoin dynamic. Here's what this article says. His administration has begun to demolish the foundations for ensuring that artificial intelligence in the U.S. is safe and responsible. Now, just that sentence alone. Of course, you could debate whether that's what's really happening. That's the way they view it. Always question this. But if you go to the meat of it and look at the actual things they're moving, whether Biden rolled them out or not, hard to deny that these things don't make sense. Now, it says further accelerating the spread of unchecked AI across American life. Now, maybe you're okay with that because Elon and Trump are the ones doing it. If you wouldn't be, if it was anybody with a D by their name, then you're being a hypocrite. And especially since you can't stand back and ask yourself whether it could be then used by somebody else later. Why we would allow this unchecked is a concern. Or, doing so is a concern. Now, it says President Trump has undone existing AI protections at a breathtaking pace. Now, first point in this is whether those were even being adhered to. I doubt they were. There's a lot of so-called protections and regulations and laws and book that they never follow. Still matters, though, that it's there, and we could point to it as something they're violating, but consider that. But it's an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy development of use of artificial. Now, okay, here's a point. That's under Biden's administration, exactly why the executive order dynamic is meant to manipulate you. Because if he could just roll it on back with nothing but a pen, then it never really meant anything in the first place. And that's exactly why it's not actually real, like a lot of the things they're doing. And some of them we would want to be real, like the women's sports dynamic, but I guarantee you it'll be flipped around next time somebody comes back. But the executive order was about that exact idea. Now it says instructions to review a presidential directive known as the National Security Memo governing national security use of AI. That's what they basically repealed. And it says days later, President Trump issued his own AI executive order, directing the Office of Management and Budget, which coordinates agencies across the federal government, to overhaul its existing directive on federal uses of AI. President Trump's goal is clear: undo anything that could get in the way of breakneck AI development and deployment. Now, I agree with that. That shouldn't be a political stand. They've been clear about that. And what they're doing is just like Trump has done in the past and in other business dynamics. Remove the regulations, get things out of the way, let them profit. Now, in some cases, that might be a good thing. But we're talking about the idea of big business or even something like this that's almost unprecedented. The idea that you're just removing, you know who's going to suffer? The average person in every way, even if he has good intentions. Do you think these corporations do? These people are, I mean, you can look back any time throughout history that you see a large corporation that gets given some kind of carte blanche. It always ends in a terrible reality, whether it's Teflon, you can name the amount of groups that have allowed to murder people through poisoning. How about just the current government we exist under, COVID-19 shots? But the problem is that very clearly rushing this in is for the benefit of the people doing it and the control structure that it creates, not for you. Even if they can pretend like, oh, look, now you can do things on Grok, or, oh, now you can have, I don't even know. What does it immediately translate to the average person? Think about it for a second. Now it says that emphasis on speed is dangerous. Artificial intelligence and other automated tools have already been rapidly adopted in the private and public sectors without first ensuring that the tools are fair and appropriate. Now, fair is not what I'm worried about. I'm not concerned about this AI being used to make things unfair for people. The world is already unfair. Not to say that we shouldn't consider that in other dynamics, but in this point, Chris, we live in a world right now where your government is constantly creating situations where you are constantly being, the world is not fair. And the idea that this somehow using the AI is going to make it fair, it's as simple as them not using it and lying about what happens or what it says. The government will always abuse you. Not that we should accept that. The point is that what we should focus on are the immediate concerns about privacy, about ongoing, the digital a biometric dynamic and how that's being applied, or how these things can be used to invasively control the way you see the world, the way you think. Even when you get into the neuroscience overlap, which gets way alarming to me, it becomes very dystopian. I don't see how this doesn't end up there with look at the past and what your government has always done, or any government for that matter. When they get a tool, it gets used, usually against you. And usually we don't find that out until 30 years later. We look back and go, oh, it looks like you were the focal point the entire time, like the war on terror. But it says the emphasis on speed is dangerous. They've already rolled these out. Now it says right here, Trump is already rolling back many of these different dynamics that were placed, at least ostensibly, to give you some level of protection. Robust public transparency and internal oversight are one of the things that are essentially arguably being removed. And they say such as chief AI officers, but see, I don't think many of us even know how this was already being applied. If it wasn't in practice yet, maybe it was just written down, but maybe that was the whole point about feigning this direction and then removing it without even happening. But it says, as well as regular testing requirements to ensure that AI tools follow existing laws, protecting civil rights and civil liberties, such as free speech. So if these are being applied in any number of these ways, and suddenly you're being removed, or who do you go? Who's accountable? Simply the law point, I think, is the most important. It says accurately perform the tasks they're given and don't waste agency resources. Now, isn't that interesting? So if you were going to make this done properly, right, if it's rushed out, it could ultimately be wasteful. But maybe that's the process they want. This is an experiment to see how this plays out. But in a time when you're talking about cutting costs and being efficient, it seems like this is kind of the Wild West of the artificial intelligence dynamic. It says there's no reason for the Trump administration to jettison those protections. Now, that's the question I want you to ask. What else would be the logic for that? Why would you remove things that would arguably be just to make sure that the things you're doing are in line with the law and in line with your current constitutional rights? Well, I think the answer is obvious, seeing as how we can point to many other examples where those things are just passing acknowledgments and really just get in the way. We'll do our best to acknowledge privacy if we have to, but we're going to do it anyway. That was directly from the Trump administration that got leaked. Talking about exactly rolling these things out. That was the Doge part of it, and being concerned about our privacy rights. And they said, well, we'll consider it, but we're going to start anyway. Didn't think that would be leaked, but it did. Now it says rolling back AI protection signals the pronounced power big tech has in the new administration. That's obvious. This includes deploying AI to probe and slash critical government programs and grants. Now that's interesting, right? Because if we're talking about something that is, it's not a sentient AI, it's a program, something that they're inputting data into, right? So if they're making it focus on certain left-leaning things, you can easily see, or the left on right-leaning things, you can see how that would be not accurate, not honest. So if they're deploying Elon Musk's AI program to go out and get rid of the things that they don't like, let's just even say only woke and DEI things. Now, I think almost all of those things are manipulations, or not actually, are a abuse of their power. But there's plenty of Americans that disagree with that. And there's plenty of things that I argue are even far more problematic that they won't go after because it's on there. You know how this applies. So it's concerning to see how this would be used. And also the bigger point is how it's already being used in Israel with Palantir, who's embedded in this administration, which is that they can kind of kick off the accountability, right? That we already heard from them with the 972 magazine articles where they're saying, well, we're simply applying the bombing where the data system points to. And even then, the point was they were telling 972 magazine that we're being pressured, we're being challenged, like that we have to meet certain metrics, we have to be done by a certain time, and they're being pressured and comparing to each other, and so they're almost forcing an interest to go just press the button, don't compare, don't look, even though they claim they're supposed to. And they made that statement that they're bombing things without even looking into it for themselves because the AI program told them to. That's what this is really about. They can always go, well, the AI said it wasn't our fault. Yeah, we killed 100 civilians, but that was we'll do better next time. That's where we are with this. It can apply in 100 different ways. Now, the main point, obviously, is just removing regulations around an unprecedented rollout of something that we know is going to play an outsized role in the future of the world. That alone should be alarming. And it's happening countless different ways in this current administration, all under the guise, and maybe you're right, I don't think so, that they have to do it this way because they're fighting the deep state. It's kind of crazy that we just accept that, even though the reality is that almost everything they're doing is eerily the opposite direction of what they ever promised they would do. And eerily exactly in the direction of what all the things they said the deep state were doing. But as long as they say they're fighting it, apparently that's enough. I hope more than anything that I'm wrong about this because it is so alarming to see how much is being ignored. Now, one of the points Derek wrote about is just the digital ID part of it. But the reality is, whether it's the NY School of Law or the ACLU or different groups that I guess some often perceived as being more left-leaning, in some cases, obviously, like I think the ACLU is very clearly more leaning to the left. The point is that it doesn't change the fact in this case, as they write, the digital ID is, this is their quote, paving a digital road to hell. That's very seriously. I mean, it's like when I remember Michael Yeadon using the word evil to describe what's happening. Like it shows you that there's beyond the normal. But this is just one aspect of how digital IDs will be used, or artificial intelligence around all of it, to put you in a place where you're in a digital prison. And everyone seems to be able to see it. Now, overlapping that with the larger point about vaccinations and the larger program, and it's all overlapped, right? So if we're talking about AI programs that they're removing regulations for, that are going to be, and here's the largest point and the whole point of all of this, creating vaccinations or injections, mRNA-based and whatever else. Don't we want some sort of regulation to make sure they're not, using gain of function, which we already know they are? That's my point. That right there would be why a regulation would be put in place to say, Buzz, that's violating this law. But they already don't care about that. We saw that across multiple administrations that were doing the same gain of function research. That was under Trump's administration too, by the way. But so here we are, where they're literally telling you we're going to use your health data that we scooped up during our pharmacovigilance, which, by the way, means they know for a matter of fact that they killed all those people because they never showed you that data from Oracle and the rest. And that's Larry Ellison right there. And they're now using that health data that Larry told you to make these shots for you, using the same AI that they're getting rid of all the regulations for. Pretty concerned about that. Stargate project, or as I titled, the AI biomedical control grid. As I said, rolls out the AI biomedical control grid backed by Israel and the deep state. Now, this, shout out to Strategic Culture Foundation, is a very interesting article. And that's where I got the image from, which I thought was pretty funny. But this is concerning as hell. I mean, I really, just again, outside of the political sense of all these things, think about if there was a deep state and it wanted to try to convince you to pick it as you thought you were fighting it, what do you think it would do? And that's not to say that that proves that this is what I think it is, but just really think about that. If you're honest and objective, play the game. Just for the hypothetical exercise, right? If that's where we were, and there was a deep state power structure, which I think we all acknowledge some degree, a lot of people vary on what we think it means and how it is formulated. It's the unelected power structure that ultimately continues regardless of the so-called selections and is there seemingly indefinitely. If they decided they wanted to step back out and take control, what would be the best and most effective way to do it? It's quite obvious, isn't it? To convince the people that thought they were fighting it to side with you. In fact, to convince you that they were the ones fighting the deep state. I think, and that's not to say that that proves that's what it is, but isn't that pretty obviously what would make the most sense? And then to get you essentially fighting their enemies to solidify that control over, and that's not even to say that their enemies are people that weren't in line with that control, but just people that maybe wanted that control for themselves. And all you're doing is helping fight that down. It's very much worth considering. And I think the Doge aspect to all of this really does add a very clear layer, just like the functionality of what this represents. I mean, and this is what's actually interesting when you get into the whole Andreessen, Alex Karp, Peter Thiel, kind of Machiavellian, the ends justify the means. And after Trump literally just tweets that out about the law, and the same point, their mindset is literally that they are so-called counter elites. Like they're not fighting for you. They're fighting for their control against the other elites, or at least that's how they're framing it. For all we know, they're all working together. But think about that in this context and realize that they are ultimately another deep state. And they're just battling for that same control. And maybe that amounts to a better situation for you or some people in certain political standings, but it's still the same centralized control structure that still has the same unaccountable dynamic, that still continues the same agendas in the direction they like at the expense of everybody else, as always. I mean, are we really pretending we're having some benevolent, altruistic deep state counter elites that are fighting for you? I certainly hope so. The evidence seems to point otherwise. Now, this is from January 23rd, 2025. It's entitled Doge, aka the Deep State Made Official. It says an acronym for Department of Government Efficiency. The Doge represents an initiative in the administrative landscape of the United States, entrusted to the leadership of Elon Musk. This entity was conceived as a body external, remember this detail, to the federal government. So it's not a part of the federal government. Operating as an advisory board with the purpose of providing strategic guidance for streamlining government spending and reducing bureaucracy, which is hilarious, seeing as how it's the most obvious example of a bureaucracy in this conversation. But what's interesting, as I said before, it's an advisory role. So legally speaking, all this represents as people that are giving advice to people who have actual authority. And we all know that that's not what's happening. If you have Elon Musk with his little lackey team going in places with nobody else around and effectively ordering things, then you're already that's transparently not the same thing. Because you have to understand, if this is, and that's what they're selling you, an advisory role, that he's not the administrator, right? But we won't name that person. I'll show you that in a second. Then ultimately, he's breaking the law. Because what it would really be is that he's advising. Probably not, most of these people don't go along to these things. You would advise somebody and they would go and take action. But ultimately, you would be somebody there who has that authority, then Elon's by his side going, this is what we should do. And then they would go, okay, now we need to do this. And ordering those things. Him doing that is a very clear deviation. Now, because the fake paradigm left-right control structure has convinced people on the right that anybody that thinks that is a Democrat, suddenly, regardless of how much logic applies to it, we can't consider that. If you start suggesting that he's just the other, that's because that's what the Democrats said on CNN. Or the obvious evidence suggests that, regardless of what the fake media was saying back and forth. It's obvious that they keep playing this very, very basic reverse psychology game with the partisanship. It seems to work more than ever for some reason. Now it says, Doge then is not set up as a traditional government agency, but rather as an advisory entity working in synergy with the White House and the Office of Management and Budget to drive large-scale and structural reform. Now, why that? One deviation there, it's interesting. Technically, they just renamed the digital services. It's very clear. As much as a lot of the Republican conversation doesn't want to acknowledge that because it's uncomfortable, the digital ID, which is part of that, the Obama, I think it was an Obama creation. You know, the point is simply, they didn't create something new. They just renamed it, and they are and carrying out the same digital AI direction transfer. That's what that's really about. So, but my point is, though, that is already a group. So then is Elon even technically part of that group, since he's only an advisor? No, he'd be an advisor to whoever's actually got the authority within that group, or even then the group above them that's actually making decisions and telling. You see my point? And so it's interesting, though, whether or not this is any of this is even like, it just seems like a bunch of smoke and mirrors. But the point, no matter what, is that you as the American taxpayer have the right to know how this is being applied. At least that's the game we always play, right? I don't think they've cared about these things for a long time, but if we're pretending we have this democracy or whatever we're supposed to call it these days, regardless of any of them are true, that they're supposed to be doing what you say or what they say, or they're at the very least what the constituents believe they voted for, and none of that seems to be happening. Now it says, that's right, something external paid for with taxpayer money that will have influence on the inside. This is a curious fact. Some believe that the potential impact for this department could be compared to that of the Manhattan Project, with an expected end date for this activities by July 4, 2026, which then that's when the so-called time runs out. But the idea we already showed you is that the legal argument is that even if they just kept working, it doesn't really matter. It seems wild. The Manhattan Project was a top secret research and development project contracted between the US, UK, and Canada to develop the atomic bomb during World War II. What did the outcome of that project mean? Now, this is important, not necessarily an atomic overlap, but the change. It says simply, so to speak, the change of the course of war and the appearance of the whole world with the nuclear arms race, nuclear deterrence, etc. So a paradigm shift. Now it says, what do Trump's people want to do? Following this logic, a full-fledged atomic revolution of the U.S. administration, metaphorically. And maybe that is exactly what they succeeded in doing. And they said something doesn't add up. Now it says, let's repeat, an external entity with internal influence at the helm. That's Elon Musk. Now my mind always goes to the many different conflicts of interest, whether it's even just from U.S. intelligence, which he is absolutely immersed with, or foreign governments, which he is absolutely immersed with. So the idea that we have somebody with wild conflicts of interest who has not pulled himself out of his companies, that has not signed any ethics pledges, that literally with more power than anybody, it's amazing that we can't acknowledge, whether you like him or not, whether he has the best of intentions or not, that is not what we think, not what anything they promised, and definitely not what intelligent people should want from a powerful government. Now it says, assuming that the deep state would be nothing more than the bankers telling the state and its apparatuses that what to do and how, does it not seem to you that this is the same thing, only normalized by the state? Now, this is not about whether you think he's got good intentions or whether he's even doing everything you think he promised. Let's just even say, for sake of conversation, that they are. He's met every promise he's made and that he has the best of intentions for you. That's the point I was making before. Even if that is the case, doesn't this then represent, maybe in a good way, the same kind of thing? The same outside influence from powerful insiders being just normalized, right? So the deep state is sort of the unelected power structure, right? So now basically turning it into kind of like Matt Ehret has always been telling you that they're going to step back out of the shadows, and now basically just normalizing it as the state. Now it says it is a legitimate question. Why would one accept a billionaire tycoon in transhumanism, finance, military research, telecommunications as an outside influence on the government? Isn't that what so many other overlords of transitional potentates? What is that one? I didn't read that earlier. The monarch or ruler. It's funny, they used another word I'll show you here that I wasn't familiar with. And it says what they basically other warlords and rulers already do, then what changes? I mean, think about we've played that clip so many times. I've even just got a lot of reach because David Icke shared it again, that Elon checks all the boxes, right? I mean, the crazy part about this is that every single thing that everybody was talking about is now being done by Elon Musk, but it's barely even being discussed in the inner Republican dynamic, which shows you that they don't really care about the outcome. They care about the excuse, the win, the immediate benefit. Now here, since I might as well, is that clip.
Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated.
Are you vaccinated, if I
Yes.
may ask?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very pro-vaccination. Yeah. I believe the science is unequivocal.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants. Just think of sensors planted into our brains.
Basically implanted in your skull. So, but it would be flush with your skull. So you basically take out a chunk of skull, put the Neuralink device in there. You'd put the electrode, you'd insert the electrode threads very carefully into the brain.
It doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you if you take a genetic editing.
It's a fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world. That's really the essence of the fourth industrial revolution.
A merger with biological intelligence and machine intelligence.
An effort for man to merge with machine in a healthy way.
Yes.
To beat machines, you basically have to merge with machines.
Most likely, yes.
As work is changing, is a universal basic income really a solution to this problem?
I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary.
Decarbonization of the economy.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
I mean, my top recommendation, honestly, would be just to have a carbon tax.
This global reset is necessary.
I'll include that. I just grabbed it really quickly. He's got some pretty good reach on it. 208,000 views. It's just Elon checks all the boxes. It's definitely worth considering. Now, back to the article, saying, the point again is that he, transhumanism, finance, military, all the different overlaps. And he says then what changes? And he says that's the right question to ask. Elon Musk, who is the largest private contractor, remember that, for government entities of our time, well through left and right administrations. So if you're pretending that as he's been pushing, Democrats are evil and it's only the Democrats and Biden did, well, you worked with them the entire time. That's the government. There's not some disconnect there. It's not like he worked for part of them that weren't part of, that was the Biden administration. Whether Biden personally checked off or whether he's senile or not, the same people that you claimed you were fighting were allowing Elon Musk and paying Elon Musk to help and build the satellites for the same administration, right? The same dynamic. I just don't know. It's amazing to me that people can't recognize that. This is the article that Derek wrote. I just can't type right now. That shows you that, this was going back. I mean, this was being built during Biden's administration. Here's the National Reconnaissance Office literally saying, now you can't hide because you're constantly being looked at. That's from that's a Biden administration state. Then it rolls into Trump's administration and they're still using the same. That's the continuity, guys. That's the real system, not the game of the wedge issues and the screaming people in Congress. The game has always been there. I shouldn't even call it a game. It's very serious. Elon Musk and SpaceX are helping the intelligence build the world's largest spy satellite network. Fantastic. Back to the article. Elon Musk, the largest contractor for government entities of our time, mainly of U.S. defense and security with Starlink. Remember, since 2010, I think the satellites, it's basically majority of one. Elon Musk owns these satellites. That's just, the consolidation of power is beyond we can even recognize right now. It says mainly of U.S. defense and security with Starlink, but also of China. What about that? Was Biden, they'd be screaming Chi-Coms, right? Right, Alex Jones? Now it says from which Tesla receives substantial funding. Now he will be the one who will have to say how to manage the federal agencies. Right, the guy who was benefiting from them more than anybody on the planet, as they write clearly the nature of the process that goes beyond the concept of conflict of interest, makes a parody of what it even means. Now it says, we are witnessing a formalization of a deep state, or of the deep state, a step that will blur the fine line between public and private even more. And you know what that sounds like? Public-private partnership. What World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and all this was, and what Whitney Webb and I have been talking about for a very long time since the COVID-19 forward, you're creating essentially a fascistic overlap. Where if you want the information, well, that's the private side, right? If they use that however they would like. They use the benefits of both to keep you in the dark. Now think of the same thing I keep seeing is like from the COVID-19 timeframe, right? I'm of the mind that Trump was put in that position because it would pacify who would be the most resistant. I think the same thing's happening right now with the transformation of our country, or the coup of the Zionist technocratic over, whatever you want to call it. So what's interesting is the same point is that the public-private partnership and all these different things, whether it's the mRNA-based shots, whether it's the reimagining of our society, right? They gave it to you in the ridiculous version with the James Bond villain and the Democrats. So we all went, no, and then they roll it out with your side. So we go, that's the right one. So it's always how this goes. So you don't recognize it when it's your side, or or you think, well, good, the bad one's out of the way. This one's less bad, lesser of evils. Always. It's still a public-private partnership. It is still a deep state dynamic. Now, it says, more importantly, why should Americans and colonized peoples accept such a thing? Oh, and I wasn't going to mention it, but the point is it's hypothetical. They simply say the word Doge symbolically refers to the head of the Republic of Venice, which was an oligarchic mercantile republic. And it says, is this an alluding to what this ministry, or more broadly, the Trump 2 government will be? Hypothetical, it's a question, right? But I think we do know is a lot of these symbolism, the way, what they wear, what Elon puts on, that there's symbols in these things. Now, whether it means something or meant it, it's up for you to decide. But the point is, maybe that's what they're alluding to. Now, it says, more importantly, why should Americans and colonized peoples by these entities accept that? So many years of fighting against the deep state only to find it in government, becoming the actual government, or, show, as Matt would write, stepping back out of the shadows, always really pulling these strings, now deciding now's the time, rolling out Technocracy Inc., starting with the Technate, starting with the, all the different things, the North American Union and all the people that are fighting it or ignoring it. Now it says, for now, as we wait to see Doge come into operation, we can share some observations. Now, what I would argue, as I'm just kind of giving you the parts that I was highlighting, they're being clear that this is just hypothetical, right? What they do over the next year, 4 years, that's what matters. And both the article and I've been saying the entire time is that if they roll out all the things that change everything for the better, still would be a positive outcome. But the point always applies that if you do it in a way that can be reversed, then maybe that's how it's supposed to go. Still, nonetheless, would be a positive outcome. So we have to wait and see action. I said this morning to somebody. The only thing that matters to me right now, more than ever, to a fault to this point, are principles, integrity, and the outcome. Everything else is noise at this point, and they're very clearly showing you that. Now, here are the observations from Strategic Foundation, Culture Foundation. Number one, these are their observations. Political power in democracies is based on the principle of representation. Now, you know my opinions about what we really have, but this is a hypothetical. If you happen to live in a place that was like that, it says, which is the process by which citizen delegates delegate some of their decision-making capabilities, making political decisions, legislating, governing, to their representatives through elections. Without the legitimacy of representation in a world where we live hypothetically in a democracy, which I don't think we do, but they claim we do, right? The point is, if we don't have that representation, then there is no democracy. Representation is based on popular sovereignty, citizens' freedom of choice, and the accountability and responsibility of elected representatives. In doing so, Doge, Elon Musk's through that, or Elon Musk and Doge through him, could truly legitimize a form of outside interference that arbitrarily nullifies, ipso facto, the need for the effectiveness of representation. Now, in a way, well, finishing the sentence, falsifying democracy to the point of making it an aesthetic virtualization. The point, though, you already see people essentially arguing that. I mean, coming from these so-called counter elites, right? Didn't Andreessen, I said Anderstein, didn't he just make an argument on Joe Rogan about how there is no such thing as democracy? It's really just oligarchy and we're here to save you. It's what they're doing. They're trying to convince you that we don't really need that old style. We need to make sure we need to lean in to this, the good elitist, the good dictatorship. And whether you agree with it or not, on one side, they hope you just want that and call for it. On the other side, they want to convince you it really is democracy, that what they're doing through this is essentially removing, like if you vote somebody in and then Elon Musk is superseding that, or by the way, it's the same point about executive orders. If they can just write it out with a pen, then representation has become null and void. And that's where this is all going. Now it says, admitting that democracy does not interest us, it's their second observation, and also admitting its eventual termination or falsification through the activity of the Doge, a kind of political hybrid would be formed, almost like an oligarchic. And this was the one I was talking about. It's patriciate, word I haven't seen before. It essentially just means the hierarchy, basically politicians and aristocracy is a good way to put it. Now it says a kind of political hybrid, almost like an oligarchic patriciate. Now, the fact that it is an external political entity suggests that there will probably not even be a need to be accountable to the government, and that perhaps the government will have no decision-making power over Doge, literally a parallel republic or a shadow government. That's exactly the point. Now, again, this is hypothetical about what they go on to do next, not just saying things or rapidly being caught lying, which I haven't even got into over the last week of all the many, and more than we've even seen already. Some I haven't even covered, which maybe I will in the next few shows, of many examples of them being caught lying about what they're doing on that Doge platform. Major, not just the 8 billion one, but many of them. Because the people that like what they're doing don't seem to care if it's actually factual. The people on the other side want to pretend that everything is wrong, even though some of it might be a positive thing. It's always how partisanship works. A parallel republic. Now it says, this forces us to ask questions about the legal system and political practice of this configuration. It is unclear what kind and how much power Doge will have in American politics. I think it's becoming pretty clear. It is unclear what legislative backstop there will be, if any. The threefold separation of state powers, as defined by the fathers of the modern era, suddenly collapses. Now, this is what it looks like to reimagine everything, sort of like we thought we were fighting. Now, it says the president, we ask, what will become? Donald Trump, or the position. If a potentially limitless external entity will be able to influence the government, then who will really have the power? The Doge or the president? And I mean, of course, doesn't that begin to seem like some kind of a transition of power? Ask yourself, who seems to be influencing that more than anything, and who benefits from that more than anything? There's no small question, it says. This is no small question. The election elected the president. Now, frankly, I don't agree with that. I think we know by now there's been, and I think I believe these people at this platform understand and in some ways agree with the larger point about how we've been, manipulated, and if not, whether our vote even technically translates anymore. Not to say that it is not important in an actual representative government, and then even more so to say whether we would even want that structure versus something more liberty, more free. But the point still being, where was it? So in regard to the selection process, that it's worth considering whether that even is the case. But for the sake of argument, the point is that if that was the case, they were put in that position by people deciding that, not Doge or Elon Musk. Now, whether or not that was picked by the person picked, it doesn't change the fact Musk was not directly voted in by anybody. Yet he finds himself with enormous power, unprecedented it seems, which we can also interpret as an extension and reshaping of his financial power. Look, again, there will be people who just do not want to consider this for many reasons. But an objective perspective from a nonpartisan lens, this is obviously concerning. Now, if it continues in a positive direction, I would still argue the structure is concerning because how it can be abused by him or somebody next, but it would at least be going in a positive direction. We'll wait and see what happens. The point remains that this kind of centralization of power is the opposite of everything that was promised and needs to be called out. Now here, it's just many more examples of what add to that very picture. Now, my opinion of how, we'll get to the shockingly obvious nature of Israel's influence over this administration. That can't be ignored with what's going on right now, especially as we see an unprecedented transition altering we have to be considering whether that's because of somebody else destroying this for their benefit. But at very least, whatever it is, this has to be concerning that we're at a point where they almost don't want you to know what's really happening here, especially from a group acting like they're giving you unprecedented transparency and then hiding everything. Now, this is from ACYN that says, the reporter asked, who is the Doge administrator? And she just basically says she won't reveal it from the podium at this time, but we'll tell you later if you want to come off the camera. This is somebody who is supposed to be acting with American tax dollars and the American interest, and we don't get to know who's in charge. Now, in the chat, let me know if there's been any, now this is from the 26th. There's another follow-up we're going to talk about from yesterday, talking about the same kind of dynamic. But let me know if they have just divulged this. I didn't see it today, but in case I missed it.
Caroline, I wanted to ask about a federal judge yesterday was saying that they didn't know who the Doge administrator was and was asking the lawyer for the administration who it was, and the lawyer responded, I don't know the answer to that. Can you tell us who the administrator of Doge is?
Again, I've been asked and answered this question. Elon Musk is overseeing Doge. There are no, Elon Musk is a special government employee, which I've also been asked and have answered that question as well. There are career officials at Doge. There are political appointees at Doge. I'm not going to reveal the name of that individual from this podium. I'm happy to follow up and provide that to you. But we've been incredibly transparent about the way that Doge is working. John.
Very interesting. Now, nobody commented, but I just did a quick Brave search to see if there was any update on from what they scooped up from the internet. And all it simply says, and you guys let me know if this is, backed up. It doesn't seem it's stated anywhere, any articles beneath it, but it simply says Amy Gleason, who I'm not familiar with, is the acting administrator of the Department of Government Efficiency. So if that's the case, what's the point of doing that? I mean, you could very easily just simply, which I guess we're all starting to understand is like a very childish tactic that has really no benefit other than just mixing things up and confusing everybody for the interest of what I think is the distraction to the detriment of all of us, including those that think they're on their side, which is just trolling everybody, right? Acting like it's, then putting that is counterintuitive to literally everything, other than them keeping you in the dark or keeping you thinking. Like, if all you're doing is just trying to troll everybody and make them look stupid, well, they're behind the scenes while you're acting like that's all that's happening. They're building a prison around you. Yeah, see, Daniela points saw it as well. Thank you, Daniela. Yeah, let me know, Danielle, in the chat whether you know anything about this person. I'll look more into it. Again, as you guys know, I'm just getting caught up after being gone for about a week. But isn't that interesting, the way that she even said that? Why would you not want to say that publicly? Why you just explain why there's logic to that in any possible way, or even more so, shouldn't we have a right to know that? Shouldn't it be wrong of her to even act like she shouldn't be able to tell us? I'm going to come back to that later. Now, here's another example of this. Oh, here, and this is what I said, by the way. Whether or not it was pointed out later, I said a nameless, faceless, unelected power structure. Sure wish there was a name for that, which even then, some people didn't seem to get what I was saying. It's funny. I mean, I feel like it's not even really humor. It's more of so like a kind of a cheeky way of framing the, deep state is the point. Deep state. That's what it's really about. It's funny that they act like they're fighting that when what they do seems to continue to represent that very thing. Now, this one is fun. Now, Elon Musk is the one that shared this. I captioned this, so I got the actual context. Otherwise, you only see Elon's little thing where it shares it. But the point was, Elon's the one that got this reach. On the 27th of February, it says, the New York Times is putting the lives of Doge employees at risk. That's literally what it says. I'm not familiar with this person, but it says independent journalist. 289,000 followers, probably because they're in the circle. But it says, you'll notice that they have no problem detailing the individuals cutting fraud and wasteful federal spending while hiding the names of the so-called reporters who worked on the hit piece. By the way, as far as I can tell, neither of those are true. The reality, even this update, it appears the New York Times have added the names. No, as far as I could tell, and I looked at this before this even popped up, it was there the whole time. So another example of that kind of follow-up to hide the thing, and an important point for what I'm going to point out later, which I think is embarrassingly obvious, is this is 10:22. This post is 9:28. So a lot of time passed before that post. So clearly it wasn't like the point is, it was like that from the beginning as far as I can tell, and it says the names are on the bottom. Now, that's not the point, though. Not the new mainstream alternative media Elon version. It's more so about the idea that we're saying that they're risking their lives. Their names are supposed to be public if they're working, if they're even as a special advisor, even as a employee of a special advisor. How in the world they pretend like this wrong? I mean, this has been going around as doxing. And I'll even show you, by the way, which you won't find Elon's in there, even though it's there. It says, there was a time when doxing was frowned upon. Why? Because all they did was take at face value what this person said. Musk named a judge's daughter, the daughter. I thought that was a different one. Nothing to do with Musk, but he wanted to intimidate the judge. Oh, he's just criticizing Elon Musk. That's not my point either. In this case, that's what I thought it was. Why are you doxing employees but hiding your reporter? Didn't even read it. Didn't even look. Now, a lot of these are very large accounts that got this reach, which that's why it has 11 million views. So the point, I just said the Republicans are literally fighting to protect an unelected, faceless bureaucracy. Like, why would you be trying to attack them for pointing at people that are working ostensibly in the interest of the American people with your tax dollars? It says, and I said, what most would call a deep state, while pretending to wage some epic battle with the deep state. They sure, but sure, they dunked on those Democrats, didn't they? And Elon Musk shared this as if that was, they're trying to deviate you with nonsense. I'm not, and of course, that's you're fighting for the New York Times. How would that be your response, which is down there? No, that's not my response. It's not fighting for the New York Times. It's fighting for whoever the point is, that they are trying to act like pointing to people that we have a right to see is somehow doxing. Meanwhile, over here, where there's been examples of that exactly happening that they're okay with because it's on the other side of the argument. It's constant. But here's the other point. Maximally transparent, Elon Musk says. Doge now tells federal court its records are, quote, not subject to FOIA requests. All of this connects back with the same point of the Strategic Culture Foundation article, or the larger point about whether this is actually the very thing we think we're fighting, or even bigger, whether there is an outside force that's actually pulling the strings, using the finance, everything. Let's not forget, BlackRock already essentially took over a lot of the treasury dynamic during COVID-19 under Trump's last administration. Not subject to FOIA? Well, that's the way the public-private partnership works. They can always claim like, nope, that's you can't because we're not technically part of the government. Now, it says, while standing next to President Trump in the Oval Office earlier this month, billionaire Elon Musk, then the de facto head of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, even though that's not true, if he's not the administrator, he's not the head. It says, claimed that his team had been maximally transparent as the Trump administration seeks to gut the federal workforce. Just because the game is, we've stated a lot of things that many of which we've proven weren't even true, but that's transparency. As they just, realize even on the website, the so-called page with the receipts wasn't even there until weeks ago. And before that, people were still pretending like we knew everything, and they proved it all. I got in a whole back and forth with somebody about it, and they realized it wasn't there. And then now that they've added them, I've proven since then that a lot of them are false. But who cares, right? Because they're saying things. He tried to be transparent. It's not the same thing, guys. That's just simply dishonesty. It says, but in recent court filings, the government said it will not provide Doge records to the public under Freedom of Information Act requests, claiming that they're exempt from the law. That sounds familiar too, doesn't it? Justice Department attorneys on Thursday filed court documents in connection with a FOIA lawsuit in Washington, D.C., wherein they state that Trump's executive order redesignated the U.S. Digital Service as a U.S. Doge service, right? Removing the organization from the Office of Management and Budget to make it a freestanding component of the Executive Office of the President. That's terrifying for so many reasons with all the things we see happening, especially now that they're acting like we're not going to give you information about this, even though it is a component of the Executive Office of the President. We don't have a right to see what's happening there? Doesn't that scare you, especially when we're seeing a Zionist overtake of our country? It says, as such, the government claimed that Doge is, quote, not subject to Freedom of Information requests. Now, it says the government's claim came in response to a complaint filed last week by government watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. In its lawsuit, the group accused Doge of unlawfully refusing to comply with their FOIA requests because they just weren't responding for records associated with the government group's actions and ignored repeated demands for Doge to preserve its records under the Federal Records Act. So not only are they they're not even keeping track of what's happening, apparently, based on these court engagements. The point here is that so remember, he's going into things like the the IRS or these different major institutions and combing through data, which is a huge privacy indication, which we've already seen with people that clearly are, at the very least, unaccountable, if not the guy posting about eugenics and whatever else, somebody who doesn't seem, that's just a side point. Really, it matters to me because of where we are, but overall, people, these 25-year-olds that are working with Elon Musk, with a person who's very clearly acting out in very juvenile, childish ways, with information that is not being protected, they've even made this clear, giving them read and write access to major databases, and you're going to tell us that we don't have a right to see what you're doing? In what world, in any context, does that make sense? Other than we're hiding something. You tell me. So the Project on Government Oversight, another watchdog group, filed another civil action against Trump and Doge last week over the claim that Doge records are covered by the Presidential Records Act. Come on. It's a no-brainer. Though, and this is why they tried to create this weird, opaque, standalone, new, advisory role. You renamed the government entity. And on top of that, there's only two ways to look at it. Either you renamed it and made it into something where there wouldn't be accountability. And if that's the case, they're not allowed to do what they're doing. Or you're giving them this influence and we have a right to see what's happening. Pretty simple. Now it says the public must have insight into the operations of the Department of Government Efficiency. Elon Musk and the Doge team have been granted sweeping access to the federal agencies. and the records of their activities should be well preserved and made available to the public. I mean, how could that possibly not be the case? Read and write access on $6 trillion databases and we're not able to see what they did? I mean, for all we know, they're putting back doors for Israel or China or Russia. We would never even know. The fact that that's pushed back on when we don't know is what scares me today. Because it is. They're guaranteed people right now are going, oh, he hates Israel. Oh, he hates Donald Trump. In some cases, you're right, but all of them are bad to me. But realize, even if that is the case, you don't know either. You're taking their word. It's just wild where we are right now. Now, it says the group's executive director, Daniel Bryan, said in a statement accompanying the lawsuit, quote, the Trump administration has inappropriately tried to hide Doge's actions from the public. Why? By declaring it is subject to the Presidential Records Act and the courts must intervene. That's just incredible. That speaks for itself. Now, weirdly, day by day, this gets more important. I told you about this when it came up at the time. At least 3 or 4 shows, I reiterated this and followed up right until it mattered, right until they were inaugurated, which is that most of the people in his administration do not have signed ethics pledges, or the ones they altered did not meet all the requirements, or Trump or Elon themselves literally ignored rules they put into place during Trump's last administration. He removed ones that Biden had there that he acted like he didn't have to do any for. I mean, it's all these data points clearly add up to a very big red flag. And on top of that, when you have hundreds of billions of dollars coming in from, or rather hundreds of millions of dollars coming in from Israeli oligarchs, I don't even need to say anymore. Anybody that's not completely biased is going to go, yeah, that's obviously, we should at least get to know, we should at least ask that question. As the person said in the office that was facilitating this conversation, I forget the name of the group. It's a government office saying that manages this process. That was saying that he could be funded by a foreign government for all we know, and that applies to anybody. Obviously, that's the case. I mean, again, as always, if you somehow still don't see it, if this was a Democrat who has very shiny ties to China, you know what Alex Jones and everybody else would be screaming about right now, whether there was evidence or not. Why that can't be applied logically, or whether right now, if it is suddenly making sense to you, it's because you have honesty, because you have objectivity. This concerns the hell out of me right now, and nobody wants to talk about this. As well as the general point that this is what I think is happening. The new Trump administration and the technocratic Zionist coup of the United States. Right in front of you, day by day. Now, another aspect of this, before we get to the Epstein point, and but really, I wanted to include this. I probably could have put it first, but right there, the next logical connection is the Epstein overlap to the same conversation, showing you how compromised these people are. Before we get to that, though, I didn't want you to miss that this is still also happening. This is just a kind of a side point to show you the Trump administration, in my opinion, is not meeting damn near anything it's claiming to accomplish, other than certain, I mean, even the things, I mean, again, I said this last time to somebody, or on the show, I think a couple times ago. I would love to hear from people what you think the actual current accomplishments are. Right? I mean, Ross Albright, for example, that's good. That is he's free, period. Or again, the executive order is the one problem, but the aspect of the women's sports, I think it's very clearly a positive thing. But the larger pictures, I mean, there's a lot of big claims flying around about changing everything. And I mean, realistically, I don't see, other than statements and claims that might come to pass, or the actions, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out to know whether it's a positive thing, that I don't see much. So this seems to be a huge deviation, or the Stargate project alone. That's enough, should show you that we are not going in the right direction. So Trump, we already showed you this on the 16th of February. Trump admin approves poultry jab for avian flu, which got a lot of pushback, because we talked about this before basically anybody other than AgWeb that we showed the original article from. And then it fleshed out to be clearly what happened. And the people that said we were wrong didn't say anything about it. But the point is, a jab for poultry, not for humans, but for poultry on the 17th of January, right before Trump was inaugurated, they approved a hundreds of millions of dollar dynamic for mRNA bird flu shot with Moderna for humans, which I'll show you in a second. The money went to them. So clearly that is Trump's administration continuing that process, which shouldn't surprise you since they are using an mRNA platform, guys. It's not hard to see. This was about going forward with a shot for the chickens, which is going to add the mRNA shot to these, or rather, let's just be clear. I get the sense that's what you'll get, but a vaccination. which I guarantee that most Republicans are not okay with right now. Not with culling birds either, guys. It's not a binary world. Those are not the only two options. They always trick you into thinking it's that or this. It's not. Neither of them should be acceptable right now. Then we followed up the next day. Trump admin reveals new biosecurity and medication plan. Suddenly, the thing I was being called a crazy for turned out to be real. Surprise, surprise, because we did our due diligence. And that's where they are currently. Biosecurity and medication. Is that Maha? Is that what we wanted? Clearly not. Now, Peter McCullough adds a new point to this. This is from today. USDA, Trump's administration, and again, don't take that as one versus the other. My point is they're all doing it left and right. Approval imminent. Not yet, but it seems to be built. They seem just about to approve H5N1 bird flu vaccine in cattle, which if they just did for chickens, I don't see much of a difference here, guys. So he says, breaking, their approval imminent for this injection. MedGenes, by the way, if you got any insight on MedGene, I was looking a little bit into it today, but let me know what you think about this group. MedGene's protein-based, it's basically animal-focused, I was thinking veterinary-focused injection dynamic. It says MedGene's protein-based prescription platform vaccine. I mean, guys, think about this. Is what we've always been fighting. The protein-based prescription platform vaccine. That is your mRNA platform dynamic. And it says nears USDA approval for cattle vaccination with meat and dairy from field tested, vaccinated cattle, likely already in the food supply. Hard not to see. Now it says MedGenes, that's what we just read, likely already in the food supply. Then he has the actual document here. You can read for yourself. They're advancing the H5N1 vaccine availability across animal species platform technology. And it says here, the MedGene H5N1 vaccine is a protein-based subunit vaccine developed using the company's prescription platform technology. Now, here are the main points to take away from this. Non-sterilizing immunity is what they are, what they offer. It says allows the virus to replicate in vaccinated hosts, applying selective pressure that can lead to antigenic escape mutations. Some would argue by design, including Dr. Peter McCullough in some cases. Now it says the increased spillover, it says mutations under immune pressure could enhance the virus's ability to bind human receptors, raising the risk of cross-species transmission and human infection. No, question all of this, including the very premise that this is even possible. Question all of it. But consider whether it's, this is the cover for whatever they're going to make happen, or we just consider the idea of what they're doing and whether it's meant to drive the very problem that we're fighting. That's this general point. Now it says in conclusion, approval of mass cattle vaccinations against H5N1 using a non-sterilizing vaccine poses significant risks. And again, if you're of the mind that this is they're not fighting any viral problem, again, the real core point for me is that it's going into food and animals that are then going to end up in the food supply. We all agree on that. It says, including the potential for accelerated viral evolution, antigenic escape, and the creation of silent viral reservoirs in vaccinated cattle. Given those dangers, moving forward with a mass vaccination campaign could worsen the current outbreak, leading to more resilient and transmissible H5N1 strains. Fantastic. That's current administration. Now, I'll include this one since we talk about the protein-based. I just think it's important to consider this technology and how obviously this is not some hypothetical. This is countless different peer-reviewed studies proving that this is what they're working on. This was January 16th, 2024. And that is gain-of-function's newest brain virus they made and genetically engineered proteins to control everything. We talk about the ferritin nanoparticle dynamic, which, by the way, there's multiple shots that are still happening under Trump and Biden's administrations that are using these, basically think of it as something that can be used. The ferritin iron particles in your body can be manipulated to actually end up causing action, causing deviations from in your movement, the way your mind works. This is all very clearly proven. It goes back years. Optogenetics, magnetogenetics. The bottom line is they argue, control. But in this case, more than that, using these and they're testing on how they can find different protein-based. That's the subscription platform idea. We'll make a protein that will make it do this, or we'll make it accomplish that. It sounds crazy, but you read it for yourself. It's the hypothetical, but I think that's where we're at. Because usually they frame the future when it's being done in the military. It's everywhere you look right now. Now, under Trump's bird flu strategy, just kind of generally showing you what we've already talked about, the plan also involves developing a bird flu vaccine for poultry and addressing the rehiring of previously fired bird flu employees. We addressed that recently. which again, I think that was very obviously to make it look like they were fighting it while they rolled this out, which pacified the people that were going to scream about it. In effect, it did. And then they just kind of, well, we're going to hire them all back. Whoops, we made a mistake. Well, even if that's not what happened, the point is that they're still they're even feigned firing people. Now they're, wait, we need them all back. Hire back all the bird flu people. Well, you mean the people that were telling you to kill all the chickens and are pro-vaccine? Yes. Not hard to see what's happening. Now it says Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced that the administration will budget $500 million for biosecurity measures. I guess, what is with this number? Everything seemed to be 500 million, 500 billion. I just think it's a strange overlap. But the point is $100 million already going immediately to research and development for biosecurity measures. That's injections. That's lockdowns, control. They made that clear using AI at this point, though. That's what he just said. Now, vaccination and tighter biosecurity measures is the main point. Moderna, by the way, as we pointed out, is developing a bird flu vaccine for humans. And, by the way, has already received about $766 million from the U.S. government. Now, realize if that was signed on the 17th of January, that money was effectively given during Trump's administration, which no one's even talked about it. So I kind of think it's obvious where this is going. I can't believe RFK Jr. has not gotten more pushback from the community for doing what? That's the point. Now, yeah, maybe everything will change tomorrow. But can you imagine before they got selected, the idea that we would talk about mRNA cancer shots or any number of other overlaps that we're seeing from the Trump administration in the health dynamic or the health field? People just said, no way, that'll never happen. He's got RFK for a reason. Well, here we are. Chicken vaccinations, mRNA shots for bird flu. Here, this is what's happening. Now, just to add to this, February 27th, 2025. This is from the USDA, where it says, agriculture and government leaders applaud the USDA's plan to address avian flu. So they're praising Donald Trump's actions for what they're doing. You might be surprised by who. Following the U.S. Department of Agriculture's announcement, the new measures to combat highly pathogenic avian influenza, hardly. The idea there's so much propaganda around this, it's incredible. Elected leaders and industry stakeholders from around the country are applauding the five-pronged strategy. That's Trump's new biosecurity control measures. U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins joined Fox News to outline the department's strategy to strengthen biosecurity. Now check it out. Now it says down here, you can see, following Trump's cabinet meeting, it's Trump's current administration. Well, look at this. You've got what appeared to be a whole bunch of Democrats. There's Klobuchar saying, yay, good job. Here's Klobuchar says the Department of Agriculture avian bird flu is an important step to support our farmers. Basically saying, good job, Trump. You're doing a good job. That's what we all wanted. Now, that doesn't have to mean anything to objective people. Just because they say it's good doesn't then for me it's bad. Just because they think it's bad doesn't therefore make it good. That's the weird reverse psychology that seems to have overtaken partisanship lately. My point, though, is that right now Republicans would argue that because they're on that. I guess really my point is, if you want to pretend like this is this good versus evil, Democrat versus Republican battle for humans' future, they're all in line with this, guys. They're all going, good job. That's what we all wanted. Or just simply seeing that this aspect of it has always been in one direction. It's all been narrative. Trump still supports the shot. He rolled out the actual plan, everything about it. But you can look for yourself. I think it's pretty crazy. Hey, look, there's McCain. It's just funny. Anyway. So, in this same vein of conversation, last couple points, Liz Churchill says, we must arrest the mRNA biological terrorists or they will destroy everything. They're pushing mRNA vaccines for our cattle now. How many cattle have you heard of that are dying from bird flu? And that's this guy quoted at the bottom, but that's what she's saying first. Good. I agree. We should fight this. And this is just me saying Kennedy has the power to stop this now. He has the power to remove the mandatory childhood vaccine to optional. He has the power to remove the COVID-19 and flu shots until further investigation. Instead, crickets. That's where we are. Right? Okay. And I simply added, well, they currently being the Trump administration, right? In case that was unclear to anybody. Hashtag two-party illusion. I mean, think of it. It's kind of crazy to me. Now, obviously, a lot of people are very clearly benefiting from the current Trump fervor. And it's alarming as hell to me that a lot of people that have continued to call this stuff out from COVID-19 seem to be incapable of making it clear that it's currently the administration that's there that is behind all this, but somehow alluding, or the assumption background being that it must be some holdover Democrat or the holdover FBI agent that did everything. Is there any evidence to any of these things? We'll get to the Epstein point. Anything? No, of course not. It's a narrative floated like they do all the time, and the Joneses in the world come out and blindly tell you that's what happened because my sources tell you. Despite how they're wrong or get caught lying over and over and over, people still seem to buy it. Now, one last point on this, I just want to make sure you didn't miss. A new study came out from Yale. Immune markers of post-vaccination syndrome. Oh my God, we've heard of that before. Indicate future research directions. Wow. Glad they're finally catching up after all the damage has been done, right? Well, as I said, TLAV and many others were telling you that long COVID, in very big quotes, was a mix of COVID injection side effects and psychosomatic illness, and being attacked for it, by the way, back in 2023 and before. And the reality is far greater than even the study shows you, in my opinion. But here's just the post we put out back in 2023, another, at the time, peer-reviewed study, which is funny that people always try to push back down below. It's like, look, I'm not even claiming this. I mean, I do think this at this point based on the evidence, but at the time, I'm like, this is just what a study showed. You're attacking me for showing you what a peer-reviewed study showed while you scream, trust the science? It's just again, it's just insane. Partisanship breaks logic. But it says he's largely psychosomatic, not real. Largely was the point in this, but they were very clearly saying that. And it says the newest study finds that long COVID is, quote, and I even quoted it, associated with factors other than SARS-CoV-2 infection, including psychological factors, which then in that includes COVID-19 or injection side effects. Point is, though, they were arguing a large part of it was simply psychosomatic, which I agree with, but it's both. Because you can see the psychosomatic, we can see that effect every time. When they tell you there's something going around, there are people out there that just get sick because they heard it. That's actually medically proven. It's a very clear thing. Not everyone all the time, but some. And it says, and I think that can be cultivated too. Here is the one that I've been trying to draw attention to since November of 2021. That's why I said 2023, because it's the only tweet I could find at the time, but long time. And what does it say? Association of self-reported COVID-19 infection, persistent symptoms among, basically, it's as it says right here. The results of this cross-sectional analysis of a large population-based French cohort suggest that physical symptoms persisting 10 to 12 months after the pandemic first wave may be associated more with the belief in having experienced COVID, and not even that you actually did, with actually being infected. Isn't that pretty damn obvious? And there's more. There's 3 of these that I have in here. So I just want to point that out. So in case you missed it. And what's funny is this is even, like, despite that, they will people that were telling us we were crazy will still never acknowledge that we were correct. Or anybody for that matter. That's how this goes. Partisanship, left and right, ruins logic, destroys logic. Now, before we get to the other part of this, there's an important middle part to the Zelenskyy aspect of this. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this because, frankly, I mean, I watched it and I think it's embarrassing. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed for all of them, and especially for people that look at that as representations of Americans. I mean, it was silly. Now, like a lot of people pointed out, I've seen both left and right pointing it out, that it seemed like it was very scripted, very clumsily so. Like, first of all, if you want to claim that Zelenskyy was doing what Vance was kind of screaming about, well, then you just did the exact same thing in reverse. You made it into some big, if you were really going to care about what you meant right there, then you would have waited until afterward and talked to him then, because all you did was do the same thing, which seems to suggest that it was the point. To make it seem like Trump and Vance are angry at Zelenskyy, and we're totally not completely doing the same thing. Israel and the United States funding this, controlling this for a very long time. I mean, we already forgotten about the major deal that's going to be made. Really? Like, so you're literally just made a deal to basically occupy and control Ukraine. It wasn't just minerals, guys. It was very clear. And then this happens, like and nothing changes. It's a script, guys. My opinion. Or maybe Zelenskyy didn't even know about it. They just, either way. Or let's just even say it was all organic. It was still childishly stupid. To be done in front of everybody shows you that they wanted to flex, that we're in control, and we're in power, which is the typical response of a weak person. Powerful, strong people do not need to constantly flex and show people how strong they are. But in this case, it wasn't just about whether it was an illusion or the idea that, I mean, again, to start, integrity, principles, and outcome. Who cares what Vance and Trump were talking about? What actually happens? Do they keep funding Ukraine like they already have? But it's just so funny to watch the partisan responses to this. Trump has already funded Ukraine more than once since he's been elected. More than once. Not only that, they're funding Israel, we'll get into, and that continues to go from Israel to Ukraine, also proven. So the game that you're somehow, Zelenskyy is so bad and here's why they're the problem. Well, okay, well then Trump's part of that problem, right? Which means all of them, because Biden and Trump have both funded them. Obviously a lot more from Biden since that was the time frame it began under. This won't go away. If you think this is over, you're not paying attention. But this is the point I wanted to talk about. AF Post pointed out, since taking office, the Trump administration has committed $16 billion to Israel. That includes $12 billion in weapon sales, partially financed through FMF grants, along with $4 billion in military aid. Now, before we come back to that, which I think is the largest part here, High Impact Flick says, while people are occupied with the Zelenskyy show, another $4 billion was just handed over to Israel. Miriam's getting a good return on that. I think it's over $200 million that they gave Trump. And they've already got what they wanted. West Bank is being destroyed. But distraction is not always the only thing, if ever. Or if sometimes it's not that, is the point. But it's interesting to consider how you can see this right now. And plenty of other partisans made the same point, that really did deviate from what was happening. We got pulled in. And that's the way this works right now. It takes all the air out of the room when they decide to make something a big point, which really had no actual immediate consequence on what was going on. And yet they dumped more billions into the hands of a genocide committing government that they're also doing alongside them. The peace president? I just don't know how you can keep making sense of this without recognizing that you're being played. Now, as Sal the Agris points out, why doesn't Zelenskyy ever wear a suit? Oh, that's right. Now, yes, it's an older picture, but it's funny, though, isn't it, to see the interesting tie-in to what we keep seeing. I mean, the simple idea that Zelenskyy comes dressed like that shows you this is a theater show. They want you to remember he's the military guy in the middle of a battle. It's just sad. That's obviously my opinion, guys, but if you don't understand and have not been following the provable work that shows you how obviously that they have been funding this group as far back as you want to look. I mean, I was going to almost grab it earlier, then I didn't. Let's see. This one first. Israel has been funding the Azov movement, which is what is basically running this country at the point, before at least. That's the neo-Nazi elements, the right-wing Azov militia, and the title is Rights Groups Demand Israel Stop Arming that group. So they've always been doing this. It goes back a long way, and the one I was just telling you is this one, which is that since not just the Azov movement, documents prove that the CIA has been cultivating fascism in Ukraine since at least 1948. Project Aerodynamic, I believe. And the bottom line, it's been a long time coming. They've been building this problem, right? So what we could see is that if you're going to try to pretend that there's some kind of deviation or some kind of schism between these two, it's certainly possible, but you have to stand back and acknowledge the full picture. It's not unique to Trump or Biden. The U.S. government and the Israeli government have been building this thing, have been funding this thing, and now just got a huge return from it. Billions of rare earth minerals, everything. It wasn't even just minerals, as I think Michael Tracy pointed out. It was about ports and they basically now control this country, which they already have, but now in earnest. So we're talking about more occupation, more technocratic overtaking of areas. I've been talking about this for a while now, whether it was Honduras and Prospera, or all these different ways they're trying to basically encroach and build out what they're building out. So on the point of Epstein that overlaps to this, another aspect of, there's two main things of this. One is this didn't happen. Kind of like a lot of us honestly told you it would, because not that we knew, but because with what we know, it seems wildly unlikely that the people that are involved in all of this are going to highlight the problem. Or even the point about when Trump said he's not going to admit what he knows about it because that would make the government look bad. Why? What's the difference here? It's all narrative, guys. Outcome is what matters. So what we got here was this claim. And it went on for a week before that. It's on my desk and we've got all the file. Okay, then why didn't you just release it? Because clearly they were hiding something. So now, jump forward to February 28th. DC Drano, big surprise there, comes out and says, I regret nothing. Justice is coming for the Epstein pedos. What do you mean you regret nothing? It's a weird thing to say. But they come out with the binders. Because it's really totally not patronizing. Of course, right next to what's lives with TikTok and all these really great journalists, right? Who constantly lie and are shilling for Israel every 30 seconds. Well, I said you're being played. I mean, it's kind of sad. I mean, here's what I said to make my thoughts more clear. I said, how cute. They even printed little titles for you. Epstein Files, Phase 1. Seriously? That's embarrassing to me. Like, it feels silly. You're either being played or you're part of the play. Now, I could obviously be wrong, and maybe even looking for something that's not there. But with how it actually seems to have ended up, I think you all get the sense already. But I mean, it just seems kind of silly, doesn't it? Like, this is information that's been there for a long time. So now they're just going to print these files and make you binders and just get. But then they weren't allowed to say anything, though, because, you know, journalism, right? We're not going to divulge the crimes of people that could still put. Okay. Well, as David Icke simply pointed out, once it actually the information was shown in these silly binders, it says the Epstein files handed to pro-Trump influencers are completely blacked out and unreadable. That's the full transparency you get from the Trump administration or your U.S. government. It's not left or right here, guys. It's about the fact that they're always playing you using that paradigm. As David said, anyone who is even slightly surprised by this has simply not been paying attention. Why would an Israeli-owned, lifelong fraud president expose himself and how his masters in Tel Aviv controlled Epstein to his DNA? Now, you may disagree with that, but the evidence seems to be pretty clear to me that this is immersed, our government's compromised, which is why we're seeing what we're seeing. And Derek followed up on this and said the Epstein documents released so far by Pam Bondi's office have not been anything new. I know there's going to be lots of hype, but it's not black pill to acknowledge that these files have been out since at least last year and longer in some cases. That's the black pill pointing. That's true. If the information they released, which it was already there, was already accessible, and then other things were blocked out, it was a limited hangout. But there, you'll find them, like everywhere, going, oh, you just can't accept a win when you get it. Whether that's a bot or a very uninformed person, it's kind of irrelevant. I said, as anyone who understands the full breadth of the situation, meaning who's actually going to be implicated in this, as we already expected. But I fully expect Team Sport Republicans to act like this changes everything. And you'll see those out there too. But surprisingly, I see far more people in the honest conservative field, which I think is the majority, who aren't okay with this because they have integrity. 5 Times August says, so they handed out these binders and instructed not to post about its contents until after they do an official press briefing. That's crazy in its own right. And then never had a press briefing. That was yesterday. Then Bondi said all the Epstein files needed to be handed over by 8 a.m. the next day. And then we never heard anything about it again. Got it. Now it's a day later. It's just crazy. And Jason Bassler put this image out, which I think is funny, of Trump, Elon, Alex Jones, and Tucker all laughing, like that picture of all the presidents laughing. And it says, then we told them we would give them $5,000 checks right before serving up the Epstein files nothing burger and conveniently blaming the FBI. Because the point, is, if you already saw, is that they were claiming the FBI. I mean, we talked about this before it even happened. Remember that? That we were showing here, Alex Jones conveniently coming out and saying, his insider says they're deleting the files, which of course is possible. I'm not saying I know it's not. But didn't we used to want evidence? When did we stop caring about evidence in lieu of just partisan convenient narratives? Guys, we don't know for sure what happened because we never got any proven. It's very convenient to come out before what now we see didn't happen and go, well, it's because the FBI. Well, it's not, but that's Trump's FBI. Well, it's a holdover from the Democrat. Okay, then you know who it is apparently. Can I have a name? Can I have any indication we know that it's a Democrat? Or we know? I doubt that's going to happen. Now, if it's already happened, let me know. Happily talk about it. But then you saw the follow-up where they said, no, now after the illusion, the hyped idea that it may happen or it secretly is happening behind the scenes, then we got the actual claim. That no, the FBI, now there's somebody not giving us all the files. Surprise, surprise. Which, by the way, amounts to Trump's administration stopping Trump's administration from showing you what Trump's administration has. Now, James Lee importantly highlights this. When asked why he gave Jeffrey Epstein a non-prosecution deal in 2007, former U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta under Trump's administration said he, quote, had been told to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. He literally said, quote, I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Very public. And he simply says, not which intelligence? I think we know. I think it's both. I mean, I think it's obviously both. There's no, it's just, I mean, the idea of Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, going, what was it, 16 times? Or was that the right number? Many times. going in there all hiding his face and sneaking in to see Epstein. There's just no way you misunderstand this, guys. So what you need to hear from this is that the Epstein blackmail sexual network that Israel was conducting on the United States is clearly involving the CIA as well, and clearly spans across all your government. Okay, if the game is to control the country or any outcome, why would you go after only one side? I mean, it's just, there's so many ways to see. Those don't prove things, but it's a logic point, okay? And you stand back and you begin to recognize there's a reason this went the way it did. Now, the Patriot Voice tags FBI Kash Patel and says, this is Kash Patel, the main account. He made a post on Twitter talking about the new, and this is on this was yesterday, talking about the new era at the FBI. And in the original post, he said this. Actually, I think I even have that right here. I'll just keep it there. I'll show it at the end. And he says, there will be no cover-ups, no misleading documents, and no stone unturned. And anyone from the prior or current bureau who undermines this will be swiftly persecuted. Isn't that a little prescient, right? I mean, if you have people in your positions that you think might undermine your authority, why would you leave them there? I think it's interesting that gets floated along with other insinuations that all lead to the. I mean, I just see, like, if that was the case, why wouldn't you have gone in there personally? There's so many ways you could point this out. It's all as if they let this go the way that it was obviously going to go, or they lied about all of it. I think there's so much around this that is raising too many red flags. But he says, if there are gaps in the Epstein investigation, we will find them. Then inexplicably edited the post 33 minutes later and removed two things: brought to justice and Epstein investigation from the original post. Why would he remove those details? He says, let me say this. It is a huge red flag that Kash decided to edit this statement, removing two of the most important key points that point to there being any form of justice forthcoming. It says, many are wondering why I have been questioning things a lot more lately, and I've been cynical about the whole thing. That's getting pushback from Republicans who don't like that he's pointing out obvious truth and objective concerns. It says, when I see things like this, it's impossible not to. There you go. But you can see, let me see if it's on this one or this is, once they edit it, that's the problem with how this works on this platform. It's supposed to say edited, but you can see right here. Now what I believe, so there's actually, let me show you this first. So you can see brought to justice, Epstein files, if there are gaps. See, it's not there. But what Hotep Jesus says down here, he says, did he delete the original post and then post a new one? And this person's basically saying, maybe it sounded too aggressive and too specific. Or no, the response was basically yes. Yes, he had quoted the post in the original. So I think it's in the original post here might just be a little mistake on what was being stated. The point is that you can see this, and the new post says something different. Either way, I think that's pretty interesting. The idea that ultimately removing, and I'll read it with it. The bureau who undermines this will be swiftly persecuted and brought to justice. If there are gaps in the Epstein investigation, we will find them. Why would you leave those two things out? Why would you remove them? Maybe there's a harmless explanation. Personally, I think it's quite obvious. Now, here's a clip that I want you to see from Pam Bondi speaking with Fox News. So this is basically yesterday, the discussion about why we're at where we are, despite all the promises, all transparency, the binders blacked out. I mean, it's one of those I told you so moments, guys. And it doesn't have to mean that we were right about their intentions. Who knows? But that's the point we always make. Most people were saying that we're objective about this and nonpartisan, as this is where we'd end up because they're all compromised. And here we are.
Welcome back, America. We're here with, and I'm very excited about this, Attorney General Pam Bondi, a good friend, especially a good friend of my wife, but a wonderful lady, a great lawyer. Welcome to the program, Madam Attorney.
Don't you love that? This incestuous overlap in your government, the media. Fantastic.
Attorney General, I want to get into this Epstein thing a little bit. I think the American people are very curious about who's on this list or these lists.
Isn't it funny the way they're even framing it? Where were you a year ago, bud? You not care? I mean, this was a very public conversation. It's just funny how now they act like we're all gung-ho about this list. Let's get this list out. It's just like anything else. They're opportunists. They recognize that's the way this is going, so we're going to act like it's new. Like we've all been told many times, they were all aware of this. Like what's her name said publicly, we all knew. Well, why did you do anything then? Well, you know why, guys, because either they go along to get along or they didn't care. None of that's okay with anybody that wants actual justice in this conversation. And once again, it seems we kicked down.
You have been doggedly trying to get all the information. And now we learn, thanks to you, that you've been stonewalled by people in New York.
Now, I'm sorry. I'm going to let it play. I just want to say one more thing before we keep it going. This is a supposed journalist from Fox News who is like the premise, the starting point of the conversation is what you said is fact without ever proving that. We haven't seen any information. We don't know. Like, you've been doggedly working hard to get all the information. So handed you a file. What are you digging through file cabinets? What are we talking about? I don't even think that's true. But the point is that you don't know what happened or why. You're taking her word for it. But this is the current state of mainstream media as well as mainstream alternative media. Just look at Jones's show. It's basically they said this and I back it up over and over and over and over all the time.
You want to explain that?
Yes, Mark. So as you know, we released about 120 pages of documents, and I started asking for these documents right when I came into office and before Kash Patel was in there. So I ended up getting about 120 pages. We carefully redacted them, of course, to be sure the 254 young girls, women who are victims of sex crimes and sex trafficking, their personal information was redacted and out of there to protect them. So I'm going through it and I kept saying, there has to be more, there has to be more. I'm assured that's it. Kash asked the same questions. Assured there's no more. I found out, this week that a source told me New York, SDNY, they're sitting on thousands of pages of documents regarding Epstein. Thousands. And of course, you've seen the very strong letter. We will get everything. We will have it in our possession. We will redact it, of course, to protect grand jury information and confidential witnesses. But the American people have a right to know. And Donald Trump is the most transparent president in our nation's history. So not only will America get the full Epstein files, they will get JFK, they will get Martin Luther King.
Well, that's fantastic, but I assume the Southern District of New York is or has been holding on to this information for a reason. That is, they don't like the names on the list. And, of course, we know New York is a hotbed of the Democrat Party, and that includes in legal circles. Do you think that's part of the issue here, that they're trying to protect?
I mean, just look at the broad, blind assumptions. You literally built an assumptive narrative, and then now you talk about that as if you have any information to back up anything you just said. It's just, this is the typical Democrat versus Republican. It is your government. All of your government is absolutely, completely immersed in this. Let's not make it hyperbolic. It's certainly possible there's not every single person. The point is, it's not a left-right dynamic. What she's framing there is lazy. I mean, listen to this again.
People have a right to know. And Donald Trump is the most transparent president in our nation's history.
Oh, is that true? I mean, the idea that you could even make a statement like that, in what context? As they're literally hiding the Doge dynamic from you, or refusing to give you information about it, or not signing ethics pledges. I mean, these are just meaningless words because it gets people to go, yay. It's words. Did you investigate? Is there any facts behind it? It doesn't even matter these days anymore, at least in the partisan field.
So not only will America get the full Epstein files, they will get JFK, they will get Martin Luther King.
But this is the point, though. We already know. I already went over this. Martin Luther King dynamic, the civil trial already showed you government was involved. And I guarantee you they won't show you that. Or JFK in Israel. Or Epstein in Israel. These are the main obvious points. The one thing they don't want you to see is where this all stems back to. And I'm going to show you that with a point in a second.
Fantastic, but I assume the Southern District of New York is or has been holding on to this information for a reason. That is, they don't like the names on the list. And, of course, we know New York is a hotbed of the Democrat Party, and that includes in legal circles. Do you think that's part of the issue here, that they're trying to protect a lot of names and individuals?
Mark, I have not reviewed the information yet. And as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, I want to review everything before I make a firm conclusion, but I think it's very interesting that they withheld that from us. And I will find out who withheld it, and they will not be working for us anymore.
So once all that's gathered, you're just going to put it out in the public with the obvious necessary redactions, including the people who were the victims and the phone numbers and so forth. But for the perpetrators, I assume that we'll see those names, yes?
Well, certainly. There's nothing can be withheld on that. Of course, as you know, grand jury information, anything confidential will be withheld under the law.
Okay. So that was a double answer, but the question, so we will know. So when this inevitably happens, she's made you a promise. We will know who did it. So if there's, let's find out. It'd be interesting if it turns out to be some Democrat stooge. It would certainly, that would be interesting to find out, and we report it ourselves. But if and when it doesn't, which I think you get the sense is what I think is going to happen, we need to call that out. The point is, historically, we rarely ever get this information. And what the one side that wants to take it will argue is that they're gone, and now you got the data. Who cares, right? Well, you would if it was in reverse. I mean, the point is, it's obvious that this matters. I think there's nobody there. I don't think there's anything holding this up. I think this is a game of words and narratives. But who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens. That's just my opinion. But the point is, she told you that she would tell you, unless X, Y, and Z, which is what I think will happen, whatever that means.
And we're going to do everything in our power to protect the victims so they're not further victimized also.
And that point is basically, of course, that makes sense. But when you look at the binder and the information we could see, you don't black out entire pages for phone numbers and names. You black out the phone numbers and names. It's an excuse like fixing somebody's arms for Elon's Neuralink. They'll give you the thing. That's why Levin very carefully repeated that more than once. We got to make sure that's not an interview. That's you stating a narrative for people to absorb. Interviews are you asking them questions. But the point is keeping this narrative going, in my opinion. So we're to believe it's all only redacted because of all the victims, but guess what? We never get to find out why, or we can prove that. Just like we said, even if they gave you an entirely blank thing, we would still not even know, or unredacted, whether or not it was even the full information. These are always important questions.
Let me ask you a question kind of in this vein, and it may be too early to know because you just got to the Department of Justice.
Sorry to stop it again. It's the same thing. These people are so dishonest. You're literally starting the point by giving her an out by going, well, probably won't even matter because you weren't even. That doesn't make, anyway, you get the point. It's infuriating to me how dishonest, how transparently manipulative these people are today.
This guy, Jack Smith, his team of lawyers and so forth and so on, do we know yet, and I happen to know that is a big damn department with a lot of people, and so it just takes time to figure things out, but do we happen to know yet whether they complied with all the requirements of the Presidential Records Act and the Espionage Act? That is, did they store all their materials for you folks to look at when you choose to look at it?
So this is so perfect. You know, the very thing that Elon Musk is refusing to do, the very thing he's saying you're not allowed to look, that we don't have to do that. He's asking that about the other side.
Do we know that, or did they remove or destroy any of it?
Mark, that's what we're looking at now. We're going through all of that. And now that I just got Kash Patel in as FBI director, he's, of course, a tremendous help. I've been in office, barely 2 weeks, and it feels like 2 years. We are going nonstop. We will get to the bottom of that. And as you know, the first thing I did was fire the Jack Smith team. That was the ultimate weaponization of our country and our government.
Or maybe we should depose them and find out what happened. But no, just kick them aside and pretend like it's all solved, because that's how that works, because they're all on the same team. But interesting point, isn't it? That's exactly the dynamic that was being applied, saying, well, Elon Musk, you're supposed to be showing us the work you're doing. You're supposed to be demonstrating your actions. That's the same exact law. Now, if it turns out that's the argument, or even the fact that he's floating this, like saying, while this is happening, were they doing this? Impossible to tell, even if you don't know, giving all the outs. I feel a narrative being built here, just my sense that it's going to come out that that's how they were secretly doing X, Y, and Z. Well, it's the same, it applies both ways, but I guarantee it won't get applied to Elon Musk. Now, here is one person highlighting this, pretty large account. I'm not familiar. Simply 177 followers, 177,000 followers. It says, Pam Bondi finally breaks her silence on Saturday night on Mark Levin. This isn't 2016 anymore, and your non-answer isn't good enough. There's a lot of Republicans out here that are calling this out. Simon Godek points out, knowing that Epstein was a Mossad agent is Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi's loyalty to Israel the reason why the Epstein client list has not been released? It's a good question. And here's Fox News, where it says Pam Bondi, Israel's our greatest ally in the world. Or the more important points, which are that she's like a very clear pro-Israel Zionist, that she is very clear. I think she was one of the main culprits that didn't truly sign the ethics pledges, the ones that the full picture coming from the Biden administration forward that Trump put forward in the last administration. Same points. I think it's important. The obvious overlaps, or the one you probably already seen that I've already played, Dan Bongino literally saying this.
That's right. What cause is dear to your heart?
Cause is dear to my Israel, the defense of Israel.
What is number one?
No, simple. They can't even finish the sentence. Israel. That's interesting. Quite the America First administration. And it says, what are they trying to hide? Why haven't they released the list yet? Who are they protecting and who's pulling the strings? It's important to think about, right? It's being called up from all over the place. Now here is Kash Patel. Now remember, this is the one that he deleted and reposted, removing the important parts, saying the FBI is entering a new era, one that will be defined by integrity, accountability. Who cares? I don't care. I don't care about words and text and sentiments. I don't care anymore. I want outcome. So do away with your dumb tweets and everybody else, whether you mean it or not. It's meaningless. Show us. Go out there and do it. And I will be the first one to jump up and praise you if you're actually following through, left or right, because as you might know by now, I don't care. But my point is, we're already seeing that's not true with Kash Patel telling you right out of the gate, Israel needs to be prioritized by Americans. Quite the America First administration. So if that's the case, add him to the list of whether he's part of this. I simply responded with the, what's the emoji called? Not buying it. Just like, yeah, come on, man. I just am tired of this game. But here's part of how this keeps happening, okay? There's a reason that everybody everywhere is recognizing that Israel, and more specifically Zionism, is the common thread here, guys. It's not my opinion. This is the thing of our time that we're fighting, and it's very transparent that it is strung through everything. If you try to make that about only Jewish people, well, you're part of that problem. Now, this is what I think is happening here. Now, there's some important information here. First of all, not new, not even remotely, typical Lumer dynamic to share things as if she broke the story, but more so, which I'm going to, for the podcast, I'll go into it in a second. It's about trying to take something that we're all seeing and act like you're breaking the story, but deviating from the most important part of that story. She did the exact same thing right before October 7th with the Israel Azov movement story. Are you beginning to see how relevant that is to what's all happening right now? And what did she do? She acted like she broke this new story about things that people like myself, and even more so before me, Alex Rubinstein, for example, covering the Azov movement, CIA connection, the very clear overlap to the Azov, basically the formulation of these, it's the same way they're using these groups like the Patriot Front in our country. The truth is, Israel and the United States have been cultivating these very same things for a long time. So when you find out that the Rise Above movement that marched through Charlottesville was literally the U.S. arm of the Azov movement, it becomes clear that that very thing was being created by the CIA in Israel. And they used that to be, that was the whole, they will not replace us, and the right is the red hats, and they're Nazis and anti-Semites. It's where it all comes from, guys. And these were fake entities. You very clearly proved this. So my point is, she stepped in there before this was going to become a very prominent conversation and left out what? Very carefully crafted around what part of the story? Israel. Very clearly left it. Go look for yourself. Clumsily, I would argue, but very clearly, carefully tried to keep that part out of the story while showing you things that basically anybody in this field was already looking at. Here's a good example of that. This was from the second, and I'm going to point this out in a second. Apparently, Pam Bondi blocked her, which for all I know, they're collaborating on why this and how this works. But the point for me is that matters. Obviously, she's a government person, and apparently you're not supposed to be able to block somebody. It seems kind of silly to me anyway. Laura Loomer says, everyone knows I don't make claims unless I've got the hard receipts. Wow. File that under the ridiculous statements of the day. She lies about things constantly. But it says Pam Bondi and the U.S. Attorney General was a registered foreign lobbyist on behalf of Qatar. It's true. It's not new information. She was compensated $115,000 per month by Qatar. Qatar has given over $1.8 billion to Hamas over the years. Oh, wow. Can you point out the huge gaping silence? The silence is deafening, like the lacking part of that story? I'm sure you can. We were talking about it a lot, even using and citing the same $1.8 billion. And say, I can hear the guy saying it in my head. I mean, it's just embarrassing. But before we get to that, let's be clear. Oh, wait, this is first, this person's responding to that and saying, so you're saying Pam Bondi was working on behalf of Israel? That's exactly where it's going. They get it. To arm the enemy as part of the justification for the current genocide? Makes sense when they're called the IDF. We called the IDF away from the border on 10/7. I have a point at the end today, just briefly pointing out the Hannibal directive again. Probably should have put it right here. Took hours to respond and then killed their own citizens with the Hannibal directive. You're not fooling anybody anymore. Very, very clearly see it, because the point is, we'll show you again, the Qatar aspect is just an extension of the Israel funding, and she's not stupid enough, even though she's not very bright, to miss that. This is a careful, crafted, don't look at this obvious part, because we're all looking at this conversation right now. Now, here's the bigger part. Note this says November 22nd, 2024. Here's the actual document of which she does not link to. I'd be willing to bet she doesn't even have the document. Who knows if I'm right about that? But here it is. Here's the actual document, which I'll include the show notes for you to look at for yourself. The claim is true. That's not the point. It matters. That's not the point either. Well, the reality is she is compromised by Israel like the rest of them are. That's the point. And she, Lumer, is trying to deviate from that clear point. Ask yourself why that would be. I think it's quite obvious with what they're all doing right now. Oh, and also trying to kind of frame this as fighting against calling out the people that we support. What you support is Israel. And that's what you're working on behalf of. And so too are the rest of them. I think it's embarrassingly obvious. But so the point again is about trying to use something that we see, that we know, that they know we're seeing, to try to kind of co-opt the movement, co-opt the momentum. And in this case, I guess lay it at Qatar, like that changes something. Or really the point being that Bondi is trying to hide the information because she just works on behalf of somebody else. And they know that we're all thinking that, but Israel. And so you deviate the obvious point. I'll include these so you could check them out for yourself. But here's the point. So she says $1.8 billion to Qatar. You guys, everyone, I've probably played this 100 times. But because she even uses that number, let's listen to it again. And this is what she's referencing.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Now, it's closer to 1.8 billion when you look at with the breakdown from I think it's Haaretz. So it's obvious what's happening here, guys. So the point is clearly about trying to hide that. Now, here is another article, and this is all reasonably new information. Not new, the post I'm highlighting. So we've been sharing this. It's been a very prominent part of the conversation. It's been around for a while, but it's become very recognized. This is from Times of Israel from February of this year, 15th. Shin Bet launches inquiry into Netanyahu aides' ties with Qatar. Premier's office calls allegations that his advisors did PR work for Doge. The point is, you can see going back a long way that they've worked alongside. Actually, I'll grab this one too. I included it in that tweet, but I'll give you the actual article. That what he was referencing is also documented by Haaretz. They sent the Mossad chief to Doha, to Qatar, to continue Hamas financial aid. That's very clear. Takes a special kind of dishonesty to not point this out. You think she didn't realize that the money was being directly facilitated through Israel? No, that's the whole point of the deviation. And as Sal Viagris points out, you were never going to see the complete unedited list. Now, Trump is only one aspect of this. I think I forget the number, 17. There's a higher number of times, 7, I forget what it was, of times that he was on the flight logs, whatever else. My point is that those things don't prove you committed a crime. But at the very least, you're associating with a sex trafficker, and I think that should matter. But here's just 9 pictures of Trump with Epstein or Epstein-related characters. Now, that doesn't have to mean he's compromised. I believe it's the case with a lot of other evidence. But overall, his point is that's why many of us we felt that it was never going to happen. And here we are. Typical how these things go. If it happens tomorrow, I'll be happy to see it. But this has been the continual way this goes. Now, the Israel overlap, guys, I mean, it's just, I don't even need to convince anybody, it feels like, anymore. It's just about it's about debating the degree to which this is happening. Here's Philip Giraldi, former CIA operations chief in Europe, Middle East, veteran, PhD, European history, says FBI Director Kash Patel affirmed that, quote, America will prioritize Israel and we stand by our number one ally, he says. Nice one, Kash. Is that really your first name or just a pseudonym? Maybe you should be looking into the various internationally binding agreements entered into with the U.S. guaranteeing the arrangements that are being violated by Israel in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza. You see, they don't care about any of this. It's not even an important talking point in the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, quite frankly, but they're the current power structure. The problem with that is that it obviously matters, but because of the current agenda, they just go, nah, whatever. Just ignore that massively international law violating dynamic, the genocide that we're all supporting. Just, forget about it. If you could brush off a genocide, pretty clear that nothing means anything. And it says they are war criminals and Washington is complicit, but I guess you're not interested in that stuff. As the FBI head, right, would that matter? Yes, it really would. They would be the ones that would be actually going after the people. Of course not. That's not going to happen. Now, he links to the anti-war article, Israel to remain in the Philadelphia corridor in violation of the ceasefire. Surprise! That's February 27th, by the way. So as we get into the conversation that's happening now around why Hamas violated the deal, guys, there's endless evidence showing you how absurdly wrong that is. Now, but this, by the way, is an Egyptian dynamic. This is, as we've been saying, illegal occupation of Egypt, illegal occupation of Syria, illegal occupation of Palestine, illegal occupation of Lebanon. As somebody recently pointed out, there is no definitive border for anywhere in Israel. Every single one of them are in flux, in question, not because of somebody else, because Israel is advancing. Again, outcome. Take away all the BS narrative. What does that show you? Doesn't matter, though, because people will tell you, really what seems to stem back to a Zionist, like Muslim bad perspective, which is seemingly not even buried today. Now, Philip Giraldi also says Congressman Massey of Kentucky has declared that every Republican in Congress, but himself has among their staff and at least one minder. He calls them babysitters, who is present to monitor and report on how the representative votes in support of Israel. The Israel First staffer is often an employee of the lobby, commonly either connected to to AIPAC or with the even more virulent Anti-Defamation League. Here's the article he highlights. House Republican claims every GOP colleague has an AIPAC babysitter. I played that to open today, but I'll play just part of it really quickly. There's no way you misunderstand this kind of stuff. It's not. If the only dynamic, only situation that it happens in is when it applies to Israel, well, at the very least, you have to acknowledge that's a special circumstance. Maybe you agree with that special circumstance, but that's what a lot of us are calling out. Why is it different? Why is this the one thing? Now, especially while they happen to be committing genocide and starving and torturing and raping people. But side note, okay, why is anybody allowed to have a caveat to international law, to any law? I mean, it's everywhere you look. And in this case, we're talking about an invasive Israel entity. Now, that's not debatable. Despite all the games and the A standing for America, it's easily proven that this was an Israeli entity that extended from their government that was simply renamed after the death of JFK for obvious reasons, because JFK was going to make them register under the Foreign Registration Act. And they changed their name. And that was AIPAC we're talking about, guys. Now, the point is, I think, right before that, because this was already happening. Either way, the point was the entity, Israel, was supposed to be called out for that, and then JFK went away, and then the problem went away. This is still happening today.
Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, "I'll talk to my AIPAC person," and it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to, dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
It doesn't benefit anybody. Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
So interesting. It's actually, I've never said this before, and just think about it now. Isn't he seem a little cavalier about that? It's actually kind of crazy to think about it. And maybe he's just trying to do it in a way that he thinks will reach people. I'm agreeing more than ever today with Thomas Massey, but just isn't it odd that he's literally describing a foreign country having a guy that handles every politician? Shouldn't that be like a much more concerning conversation? And of course, as somebody points out in the chat, Tucker does play dumb very well. I think it's ridiculous to think he wouldn't have some insight into that conversation. It is dishonest. But as I pointed out, very importantly, if you didn't see this already, which gets, oh, look at that. He hid the comments there. So Greenblatt from the ADL, he says, this morning at the ADL's National Leadership Summit, I spoke about where we are now, a turning point for American Jews. The numbers don't lie. Anti-Semitism is at historic levels, and too many are willing to look the other way, but we won't. Now, obviously, don't forget the provable reality that they basically turned every Palestinian flag and every protest into an anti-Semitic event. They turned every flag, Palestinian, and promotion and protest into an anti-Semitic event, even though they weren't. Sort of like, interestingly, if you want to associate it with something in your mind, how they made every red hat mean anti-Semitism. They made every red hat into being some racist white supremacist thing. Remember how dumb that was because it wasn't true? Well, it's happening elsewhere. Stand back from the partisan lens and realize the same thing they were doing to you, they're now doing to them. And they did. They said, oh, it's all anti-Semitism. The dark looming cloud, it turned 400%, they claimed, was mostly Palestinian protest for not Hamas, but for self-determination. And on top of that, most of the ones, they were actual things. A lot of those turned out to be fake. That's not my opinion. Now, anyway, we've gone over a lot how ADL provably has faked Nazi marches and hate events all throughout history. I mean, reported by Israeli media and even human rights groups. But his point on top of that is that, that's what I was going to say. American Jews, he points out. Let's not forget Haaretz just told you recently and more than once before this that Israel is the least safe on the planet for Jews. Not because of anybody else but the Israeli government. That's exactly the point they made. The leading Israeli newspaper, but keep listening to these manipulative Zionist propagandists. Either way, the bottom line he's pointing out is that this rising anti-Semitism is everywhere. And I simply said, Elon, depicted below, discussing the very high bar that the ADL is setting in its fight against anti-Semitism. Obviously, I'm making a joke. Obviously, that's him doing the Nazi salute that totally wasn't, that it was my heart or whatever. Again, for those that didn't see the coverage, no one's suggesting that we know his intention. Only an idiot would do that. That's most of the partisanship. We know he meant to do it. No, we know he only meant to send his heart. You're both dumb, okay? Because nobody knows what's in his head. That's a stupid assumption. Self-serving. The point is, he claims he didn't mean, that's not what he intended, so who knows? It's dumb, though, because it's a textbook Nazi salute. He's biting his lip. He's all aggressive about it. Well, I don't know what he meant. Maybe he's just that ridiculous. Maybe he's that, autistic or whatever the terms they use are these days. What do you say? Anyway, the point is that the ADL refused to call that out. Give him the benefit of the doubt, they said. So it's just silly that we're watching a group that's gaslighting around fake events while ignoring what is objectively exactly what that would look like, whether he meant it or not. It's sad. But it's all because it's a game, guys. It is a manipulation. This is one of the things I was joking about today that doesn't seem to be, people like, what? This person's like, wait, what? It's like, humor. It doesn't seem to work anymore. But so this one is another example of something that was the administration. Nancy Mace says real women have their own bathrooms in Israel. And I said, oh, good. Nancy's in Israel again. Being facetious, obviously. That's not a good thing. That's the second time, guys. I mean, this is insane to me. Rubio, first call, flies there twice in a matter of a month. Like, that's not normal, guys. It's crazy. These are rabid Zionists fighting for another country. What's funny to me, though, she's trying to use this to go see, well, essentially going, Israel is better than America because we don't have, which must be clear, is a very clear partisan agenda to the, what do they call it? The trans bathroom. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's one of those things that I think most people, even Democrats, are like, that's just, it's a partisan thing. They're driven for their sides. I can't tell you the truth of what the numbers were. I think a lot of people are like, I'm speaking for myself. Obviously, my coverage. That was insane. It was wrong. It's dangerous. It's not medically correct. But either way, the point is, she's trying to go, look, in Israel, that's not happening. So it's a dunk on the Democrats after you're already in power. For what? For a cheap win. That's all it is. They're trying to get you to go, yay, they're the good side because they dunked on Democrats. It's simple and lazy and dishonest. But that's not the point. She's wrong, is the point. Hey, look, they get their own bathrooms in Israel. Hey, ask Grok. Does Israel allow trans women into the women's restrooms? Yes. Israel generally allows transgender women to use women's restrooms in line with their gender identity. There's no nationwide law or regulation in Israel explicitly prohibiting transgender individuals from using. See the point? Isn't that funny? So Nancy Mace is ridiculous, but like the rest of them, but it doesn't even matter. The truth doesn't matter. It's about narrative, guys. But she won't respond to that. She won't care. I think that's hilarious. Now, the undeniable Israel first nature of Trump's administration is undeniable. I mean, watch the show if you'd like to go more. I think today is enough alone to show you these people are acting for a foreign country and not you. But lastly, this was one of the main things I was laughing about. It just blows my mind today how this platform works. I mean, the kind of petty nature of people, it drives you to be that way. It's just crazy. So here's what I posted. This post, which is very clearly from, if you think today that I don't read these all the way, I think my post makes it clear anyway. As I'm always talking about due diligence, RFK Jr., then Maha, commentary only. And if you actually look at the account itself, it very clearly says parody account. Okay. And it says, this tweet risks being reported and restricted, but I see it necessary to say it out loud, clearly playing the role. But it says, our real enemy isn't Russia or Ukraine. It's not even China. It's the ones who induced and tried to perpetuate wars so they can launder billions of our money into their own pockets. It's the ones who funded revolts and instability all over the world via USAID. It's the ones who have committed unspeakable crimes on children. Okay, you get where this is going. It's the ones who manipulate people with endless propaganda using our tax dollars. Okay. Obviously, in the partisan loans, it's like the Democrats. That's what people would want to read in that. And I think that's what they were going for. My point was like, well, that's Israel. You go down the list. That's exactly to a T what Israel's doing to this country. But so I wrote, and as you know, my structure, I've done this many times where I go, breaking, look what's happening in Ukraine. And then I go, oh, wait, it's actually in Israel, so you could ignore it. That's the spacing. I do it all the time. And I said, RFK is finally calling out Israel. And I linked to the JFK assassination conversation. Then down here, I said, or am I misunderstanding what he is saying? Winky face. Now you tell me, I think that's like ridiculously obvious that was not, okay. Then to make the point immediately, and I'm talking like half a second later, it's 10:13, 10:12. It was less than a minute, it was 30 seconds later. I just followed up right away and said, yes, I'm aware. It's not his account. Just make it a point. Before it's intentionally because I felt like I wanted the joke to be funny and not include that dumb sentence in the joke. Nonetheless, have a good time reading through the comments because it's insane. But all I said to follow it up was, I'm just making a point about Israel and the deep state. My point was, this all sounds like Israel and it's being framed otherwise. I was trying to be funny and got wrapped into this back and forth with a bunch of really stupid people that were, you knew you were wrong and just admit it. It's crazy. It doesn't matter. I didn't even show you. You could read through it for yourself. But the point was, the argument of all these things that they're doing, and of course you can look at it and go, Democrat, 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 which by the way is half the story, seeing as how most of them, if not all, are completely influenced by Israel, is that if you read that and look at what Israel's doing, it's the same argument. So what's the deep state we're talking about here? If everything applies to the group that you claim is your chief ally, that's the point that I was trying to make. My frustration with today was like, I for some reason feeling cheeky, making a couple of funny jokes here and there, and it was like flat. Maybe I'm just not as funny as I think, but I thought that was incredibly frustrating. It's just, you can see them down below, people like going back and forth, screaming about how you're wrong, and I've followed you forever, and I don't believe you anymore. It's like, for all I know, it's an IDF bot. It's just crazy. Personally, I feel like I've done a really good job of being objective about things and trying to be, not fall into a trap. And then if I do, I'm wrong, I follow up and try to correct it. That's just me, though. Apparently, I'm wrong all the time, according to some of these bots. Anyway, joke aside, I'm just being facetious. The idea that how obviously Israel is, like I said, like a tick embedded in this administration, or rather in this government. It's important, like everything we just showed to finish today on the point of the ceasefire, keep all that in mind. Because you cannot decouple these things. The Israel influence over the United States government, who is basically, at least publicly, controlling the reins of where this goes, which I don't think that's the truth. But Trump Gaza and all the different, everything they've been doing since he got into power is belligerent. It's insane. I think you need to consider why. Especially since I don't know how anybody that's honest with themselves can think that this is in the interest of the United States. Like, even if you think they're going to do illegally, which it would be, just take all the resources and occupy territory. At the end of the day, from a world perspective, you are destroying any semblance of credibility. And who benefits from that? Just off the top of my head, the group that argues that the destruction of the West is necessary to roll out the end times. Just first thing that comes to mind. But you guys can decide for yourselves. Now, this is before today's conversation. This is February 23rd. Israel indefinitely delays Palestinian prisoner release as hostages freed. So I just want to show you this because this was February 23rd, not today with the narrative about, whatever they kind of contorted the narrative into to make it look like they just responded to Hamas being crazy. They already came out at a time when at the moment, basically everything had been met. Now, the deviation was around the Biba's family, the mother in particular with the body that was, maybe a mistake, maybe an intentional ploy by Hamas. Either way, they followed up and the body was returned. At that time, Israel wasn't crying foul. They criticized, but they got the body and they went forward. Okay. And then things have happened since. Releases have happened. Okay. So the argument is that's not, they continued with the deal and continue to release Israeli hostages, and Israel accept them. So at that point, the argument that somehow the body right there dynamic was the reason is kind of ridiculous, seeing as how they were going forward with the ceasefire. But then they criticized other parts of it, like the music that was playing, all these different things, and basically said, we're delaying all of this. You're pausing it based on your actions. That was first, which everybody, myself, people were going, that's ridiculous. Myself included, is what I was going to say. Is what you're just going to pause the ceasefire for what? What's the reason? And of course, people that defend Israel because Hamas, but it's not. What's the reason? What's the logic? Okay, but then it went forward. Oh, it will actually. This was. I just had the wrong spot. I'll show that last. Next, it goes forward. Now it says on the same day, U.S. backs Israel's decision to delay Palestinian prisoner release. Why? Now it says the White House has backed a decision to delay releasing more than 600 Palestinian prisoners as agreed to in the ceasefire. A U.S. official called it the appropriate response, here it is, to Hamas's hostage handover ceremonies, termed humiliating. So you're not upset about the Biba's family, you're not upset about the body. You went all the way back to things that happened before that. And you're arguing that the way they released the people is enough to you for now to you just to pause the process after you got your people? That seems really honest, doesn't it? Now, on top of the fact that you're not worried about the raped and tortured, burned, emaciated people being released in handcuffs and white shirts from Israel who are being dragged out or the bodies being thrown out in bags, that's okay. But people coming out smiling, fed and taken care of, or the wrong music playing, which I also thought was inappropriate during the coffins coming out. This is a lazy excuse because all the other narratives didn't work or fell apart in front of them. I think the Biba family is the main one. That was what they're still using it, by the way, to argue that we just have to wait because before you release them, like after we already accept more, you go, just sort of being confusing here. That happened the Biba's family. Then they released more hostages and Israel came and picked them up. And they're refusing to return hostages on their end. So they took their part of it and then went back and said, no, but you did this thing before that and we're not going to give you our people now. I mean, anybody honest, anybody who's not a completely bought off moron is going to go, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, this is where I've been. Then, one day ago, actually, let me refresh that. I think it was 2. Oh, I guess, okay, it's still refreshing. Oh, never mind. Way more than that. Hamas says no Gaza ceasefire talks unless Israel releases prisoners. So the point was basically they're saying, look, we're not going to get into an engagement about changing the deal until you meet your part of the agreement. Just simply reverse the point and you would be like, oh, of course, Hamas has to release their part before that, right? Okay, so why would it be different? Why would Israel have the moment to go, we're going to change the deal because we don't like what you just did a second ago, even though we already took our people before that? Okay, so that's where we were essentially before I was away for a little bit. And the point was, that's insane to me. The obvious dishonest nature of that, to claim that we're going to take everything from our side of it, but we're going to wait because of something you did that even in the process of met the obligation of the ceasefire. So also on the 23rd of February, Haaretz wrote this: Netanyahu may exploit latest Israel-Hamas hostage crisis to nix ceasefire deal. That was days before they announced this. So the leading Israeli newspaper was saying they're going to use what just happened to nix the deal. Then they took their hostages back and then did that. And the U.S. government was like, whatever they say, whatever, because they already said no matter what they do, Trump said we're backing them and gave them more money, which we'll get to in a second. Now, on the 15th of January, because we already saw this, because we had the data and we weren't assuming, we looked at what they were saying out loud. And that was the new ceasefire agreement Israel already plans to break. And we showed you right away, as we already said at the beginning of the show, they were publicly telling you Trump said we could break it right at this moment, guys. On January 15th, we were telling you that Israel would do what they're doing now in January 15th. How many times that happened, guys? It's important to recognize that, demonstrating our value for you. Then, of course, we followed up on the 21st. Israel at that point had repeatedly violated the ceasefire, according to UN, according to Amnesty, human rights. I mean, everybody everywhere was going, look, they're firing at people. They're not delivering the food. They've restricted the shipments of the houses they promised. And despite pointing it out, Hamas just kept going forward with the deal. Blatant violations like they do everywhere. Even worse, on the 30th of January, they literally opened fire on the Palestinians that they released in the exchange. And that wasn't enough for them to break. Because the point is, Hamas wants this to come to an end. Otherwise, they'd go foul and run back and keep doing whatever you claim they're doing. But they didn't. They just accepted it and kept going. I just don't know how many more things we can prove. And also just going back to October 7th, 2024. So 1 year into all this, here's Haaretz. How Netanyahu has systematically foiled talks to release hostages. That's just one of many covering the reality. Now, on March 1st, yesterday, here's what Israel said. Hamas says it rejects Israel's formulation of extending first Gaza ceasefire. Okay, so just to be clear, that wouldn't change anything. So if you were going to be honest with this, that would be the ceasefire is continuing. The point is, in this point, they were supposed to discuss how phase 2 would bring an end to the war. Israel instead criticizes, says, you did this wrong thing, and then just kind of arbitrarily stops, doesn't release the hostages that they were supposed to meet the last phase, and says, wait, we're not going to do anything more because you humiliated people. Then they go, but now we're going to add new things to the deal. Not to take it into the second phase, which would arguably be the end eventually, but to extend the first phase. Now, why would anybody in an honest dynamic do that? Why would you go, what you have here's concessions to whatever you want while you haven't even met the last part? That's how dumb this is. Now, if you read into this, that's how everybody's framing it. Hamas turns down the ceasefire. That's how they're framing this. It is wildly dishonest. And you need to, anybody, anywhere who is framing it like that needs to be laughed at. They need to be seen for what they are, either not informed, blindly propagandizing, or trying to get clicks and shares from certain groups. Jeremy Scahill points out, major news organizations are making a conscious choice to frame Israel's total violation of the ceasefire agreement as Hamas rejecting it. This is realize that's not even the many violations every day up until this point. That's just the fact that they did not meet the main obligation of the last part of the phase. Now it says this is a demonstrable lie and has been through the entire duration of Israel's war on Gaza. Israel's rejecting the deal it signed, just like every other time. Now I should have grabbed these earlier, but I didn't end up doing it. But you remember these. This is the last time. Robert, there's actually, I think, probably 4 different articles like this. But we talked about this many times. This was May 7th. This one was June 2nd. Hamas agrees to ceasefire. Blinken then made the rounds going, all we have to do is get Hamas to agree and it's all over. And then Hamas goes, okay, we agree. And then Israel decides to attack Rafah, which was a red line. It was wildly transparent. And then Blinken, the fool that he made himself into, already was, but clearly just became this he turned around and said, Hamas did this. After just telling us that Hamas was the only thing stopping it, and then they bomb somebody, and then they go, Hamas broke the deal. It's just incredible. And then after that, these are only just 2 examples of the previous dynamics. June 2nd, Hamas once again refuses, Israel once again refuses own ceasefire deal after Hamas accepts. Watch it for yourself. If you're not a dishonest person, this is objectively clear. So Assault Rod yesterday points out this is one of those starkest examples that we keep seeing. Now, whatever you think about it, people seem to be weirdly pushing back. I think, Haaretz is not the leading. Haaretz is clearly, I think objectively with the metrics, the leading Israeli newspaper. But at the very least, it is a clear leading entity in the field of news in Israel. My point even saying that is because of how Haaretz has been one of the groups that has seemed to call things out. And for that reason is being censored and kicked back on. And they're going after the group in general in Israel. But the contrast between the current reporting from Israel in Haaretz and what the West entirely is saying is bonkers, guys. It's like every day they're literally saying the opposite of what Israel's newspaper is saying. Here's what it says. Netanyahu stalls stage 2 of the Gaza ceasefire and once again weaponizes Israel's grief. That is Israel's headline. Here is NPR and everybody else, left and right. Hamas rejects Israel's request to extend phase 1. Now, technically, not inaccurate, but the way they frame the article is that is the violation. And that's why, as we're going to get to, Netanyahu has already gone back. Well, he's gone back to publicly stating the war is on, gone back to killing people, never actually stopped. They've been killing people the entire time. But publicly gone back to flagrant violations or just back to the war on Gaza. Like, by the way, was the agreement with Trump. That's the point she makes all the time. Israeli media, Netanyahu's breaking the rules. U.S. media, Hamas did it. They don't parrot it along with all the we are the media now types. Don't forget, we have the libs, the people sitting there getting those DC binders who are aggressively propagandizing for Israel. Now, Rami Abdul, chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group, Israel unveils, this is yesterday, late in the day, Israel unveils the U.S. Steve Witkoff plan. And we've talked about it already. One of the many aspects of this current dynamic, the administration that is, advisory or not, the idea of people that are completely continuing to, these people are not in the interest of the American, what anybody in the U.S. citizenry think we want or fight for. What you could look at the actions and look at what continues to happen. How is any of this in the interest of America? Other than the broad idea that if we don't do it now, they're going to come back for us. You know how long they've been saying that? And the reality is they already have, and they're the ones doing it. Not Hamas, not Iran. It's the people who are actively, right now, doing what they claim you're trying to stop, and all you're doing is fighting their enemies for them who are trying to stop them. Or even in most cases, just protect themselves. It's insane to look around and see all that Israel and the United States have done over the world, everywhere. And then compare that to even what they claim Iran is doing. Or Hamas, or Hezbollah, or the Houthis. It is literally David and Goliath, and you're siding with Goliath. But he says, having already violated the agreement's first phase, Israel seeks its captives' release while maintaining its siege and killings, still blocking equipment to retrieve thousands of bodies under the rubble. These are children who are suffering right now in occupied Palestine, guys. This is in the midst of what's supposed to be a ceasefire. You don't even want to look at some of the Zionist comments down there. It'll make you sick. from suffering children. Now, he also points out, so this is March 1st. This is yesterday. Okay. So not only have they already been killing and bombing and so on in more discreet ways, I would argue, if that's even possible, it's probably not the right word for that, but in the context of what was happening. But right when they tell you that they did this and we're breaking that because we broke the deal and they didn't accept our changes, they immediately murder a bunch of people. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. This is the wrong one. That was this one. It's right here. I'll come back to that. Sorry, I thought I shouldn't make a joke about it. Sorry, I'm confused. There's so much obvious butchery and murder, and I'm confusing them. But the point is, this is an investigation from Rami Abdul. That's why I put it next to the tweet, following up on something they investigated back in December 4th, 2023. It revealed Israeli drones deliberately killed 12 civilians in Gaza, which, I mean, sadly, that seems like a very... It happens every day in this country, in this place right now. Every day they're doing this. We've proven it the entire time. What he's pointing to is that they did an investigation with the data that they can prove that they knew what they were doing. The attacks targeted the Abu El Anin family, including women and children. Now, you check it out for yourself. This person you should be following, the Euromed Human Rights Group, has been doing great work this entire time. Now, Robert and Lakesh today reports Israel just ended the ceasefire and blocked humanitarian aid into Gaza, which we'll come to in a second. Cuts off Gaza aid. Nope, they never really let it back on, quite frankly, but they're now publicly telling you the thing they've been denying the entire time. For the second time. He says, while full-scale war is yet to break out, Netanyahu refuses to honor phase 2 of the deal. He declared readiness to call up 400,000 reservists, threatens invading Damascus, which I think is a ploy because they're already there, and attacking Iran. Almost like they want you, they're threatening in like lunacy in order to hope that the U.S. and everybody else jumps in and does that for them, or however you want to look at that. Jeremy Scahill says, one small detail about today's Gaza ceasefire developments, a senior Hamas official just told me that Israel publicly announced Hamas had rejected the so-called Witkoff proposal before Hamas had even been officially briefed on it. Now, of course, they could be making that up, but it certainly aligns with what we already know. So Jeremy Scahill's telling you his source is saying that they weren't even informed. So that would perfectly line up, that they knew they were going to break it, so they knew they were going to blame Hamas. Why even tell them? Why even give them an opportunity to jump ahead of the story? That's what it sounds like to me. Now, he added that Hamas's position remains that Israel is in violation of the signed agreement. That's transparent, well before we got here, and is demanding that mediators compel Israel to respect the terms of the deal. That shows you the mediators aren't on the side of truth. Israel refused, well, unless if they, so far, yes. If they don't, my point, they should have already said something if they were honest, in my opinion, but we'll see what happens tomorrow. Israel refused to begin phase 2 negotiations, which are supposed to start on February 3rd. Mohammed Shihada, pointing out to the Biba's family overlap. Oh, is this the one to make sure it's, is it the right one? I'll just read it. I thought the Biba, we're going to get into Biba's point in a second. He says, Israeli hostage families. Okay, this is the right spot. He says, Israeli hostage families are crystal clear that Netanyahu is the one violating the ceasefire and doing, quote, everything to blow up the agreement. Every time. This is the same point as Haaretz, guys. This one is, it's in Hebrew, but I can't, it's the, what's the platform? I forget what it is now, but it says not a single U.S. mainstream media is quoting Einav Zangoker's words. They're instead deliberately manufacturing consent for genocide again. Every single time we've had this, where families of the hostages, in this case, hostages themselves as well, are saying they're the ones trying to ruin this. Mostly is the families that know that they still have people there that might die. And they know that, what are you doing? You're going to kill our families. I mean, they know it every time. Same as the Biba's family, guys. But you're not going to hear that in the West. Now, my point is, the killing immediately continued. It's the same every time. Not that you even need to see it, to be quite honest, but ceasefire is over. Israel's begun to slaughter civilians again. Time for true promise 3 Iran, Yemen shut the doors. The point is they're killing people. Because, I mean, ask yourself, what's the point there? Are you going after Hamas tunnels? Are we even, narratives don't even matter anymore. There's not even an effort to try to explain away blatant murder of civilians because they all know you see it, guys. And they now know they can get away with it, at least right now. Now, this is the one I thought it was before. Mohammed Shihada points out, he says, I was ruthlessly attacked when I warned a month ago that Israel's government has been weaponizing the Biba tragedy. Now, again, something we've been telling you for years now, or I think over a year, 2023 before, which is right here. As TLAV and others have been demonstrating since 2023, IDF bombs killed the Biba's family, and that the public has been publicly available information shared by the father himself, as he still maintains right now, which I just did a show on this. Even to the point we'll show you next, the Biba's family is telling him, not only are we being lied to about this, but that the Israeli government's using them. Surprise, surprise. Exactly what we were telling you. The point was, here is December 22nd, 2023. And even Lipschitz has followed up with this, the first one released, and said that she confirms this happened. They tried to return their bodies. This is me posting this December 22nd, 2023. They tried to return this was Eli David. This baby is still being held. He's using them just like they are today. And I said they tried to return their bodies after being killed by Israeli airstrikes. They tried to return them for free. Now ask yourself, why would they do that if this was a ploy? You're going to return the bodies so you can say, we killed them here, take them back. I mean, the point is that Israel could have taken them right then and easily then been able to do forensics and prove what actually happened. Not 15 months later, which is not even possible in my mind. Not really. Not in the sense you can be certain about what you're looking at. But they didn't. They called it psychological manipulation. They turned them away and then went on to lie about it for a year, which everyone's calling out, and I'll show you in a second. Hostages have confirmed IDF killed hostages more than once. But keep telling that. The point was they're bombing everywhere in the country, obviously. But we knew that's why that is what they claimed was the violation of the deal back then. Them trying to give them back family members that were already killed, even though it wasn't part of the deal. And they called that a violation. We're right back to killing people. Over and over and over. Now he says, now Haaretz states that the same conclusion, word for word, while none of Israel's propagandists are calling Haaretz vile or anti-Semitic. That's not true, actually. There's a lot of them, but I get his point. Here's Haaretz. Here's the article. Up to his old tricks, Netanyahu weaponizes grief and puts stage 2 of Gaza ceasefire on hold. Right after they just told you a week ago that he might do that. Kind of hard to miss the obvious continuity here. Now, we told you this on February 22nd. Again, after a year of covering this, Israel continues to weaponize the Biba's family killed by the IDF. Here is the Gray Zone article, written by Wyatt Reed and Max Blumenthal. Biba's family threatens to sue Israeli government as official propaganda on hostage killings unravels. Just to read the beginning, read the article. It's basically everything we've already reported. The Biba's family demands the Israeli government cease exploiting the deaths of their family members for propaganda purposes as layers of evidence support claims an Israeli airstrike killed them. Sorry, pause weird. Family members for propaganda purposes as layers of evidence support claims. Basically, the point is, read through it. As we've already been showing you, as not only does he maintain it, the point is the evidence, as Dan Cohen has been covering, as even the corporate media accidentally covered, shows that they were killing their hostages. The main point here is that they are, the family they're claiming they're supporting are the ones going, stop doing that. They told them, stop speaking about them. Don't make this public. They did anyway. Then they went out the next day and made a big public statement about why they don't care about the Biba's family. They care about using the Biba's family. And now they're being called out by the Biba's family. We've been telling this for such a long time, and the evidence is transparent. Here is the actual statement, thanks to their article, from the family. You can read it for yourself. And it says, although it is surprising that it is necessary to request and emphasize this, they're telling them to stop doing what you're doing. They do not believe them. Now, this is from Ynet News from the 21st, February. Simply says what I've been highlighting. It says, just 6 weeks later, on November 29th, 2023, Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades announced that Shiri and her babies had been killed. At first, Hamas claimed they died in an Israeli airstrike during the fighting. But this part, by the way, I can't confirm this, and I don't believe this happened. This is Israeli media, so consider that. Unless you have more to this, please send to me, because I'd be wondering where this came from. But it says, at first, Hamas claimed they died in an Israeli airstrike. Then, it says in a chilling reversal, they proudly admitted to murdering them. Now, I don't think that's true. I've never seen that anywhere. In fact, I've seen most statements have been pushing back from the very beginning, even before they said they were killed. So, in the context of what actually happened, you tell me. But my point is, I think whether they proudly admitted that or not would be very relevant to me if you could find that. I don't believe it happened. The IDF said that it had informed the Biba's family of their deaths. Then it added it could be psychological warfare at the time, right? That's what we already told you. As previous people were declared dead and then returned. The following day, on November 30th, Israel and Hamas extended the ceasefire by 24 hours. Hamas submitted a new list of women and children captives just minutes after the ceasefire expired, allowing negotiations to continue. Reports soon surfaced that Israel was outraged. The new list contained only 8 captives instead of the agreed-upon 10. Initially, Hamas had proposed releasing 7 live captives along with the bodies of the Biba's family. Israel refused. That's the point I was just talking about. At the time, intense speculation suggested those 3 executed hostages were the Biba's family. That's what the evidence shows. And that's what Hamas claimed, by the way, but we can't take it at face value. President Herzog met with then U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Now it says there are still around 150 hostages who are in Hamas hands in Gaza, he told Blinken. I would like to raise the plight of the Biba's family. They've been using them since the beginning. At this point, they knew they were killed. A 10-month-old baby, 4-year-old baby, and parents, their whereabouts are unknown to us, and we are demanding their immediate release. It should be obvious, and this is right after they refused their bodies, mind you. It said it should be obvious that little toddlers will be released with their mother and hopefully with the father as soon as possible. The ceasefire ended that day, right? So my point is because they then refused the bodies, and fighting resumed. Rumors of the Biba's family's deaths faded, and Blinken returned to Washington without taking any decisive action. Attention shifted back to the battlefield. See, they let this happen. For over a year, Israeli media writes, the Biba's family remained a focal point. Posters of the 2 redheaded babies lined streets across Israel and New York and everywhere around the world, guys. Why does that make sense? And it says demanding their release because people in New York Times Square can help with that, right? The hope that they might still be alive endured. But was it ever real? It wasn't hope they might be alive. It was propping you up to be outraged so they could use that. And using your emotional outrage about the fact that they were there in the first place, which matters. But let's not forget that it wasn't actually Hamas that took them. It was called the Mujahideen Brigade, which is not part of Hamas. Look it up for yourself. That's a very public part of this. And I think they even mentioned it in this article. If not, we just recently covered it. It is very clear. I was just pointing out Ryan Graham was making that point about how dishonest it is. They can't even be. That's one of the most basic points, and they can't even be honest about that because the interest is making it about Hamas for Israeli propaganda. But it says, if Israel rejected the return of their bodies, which they did November 2023, why did the government allow the public to believe that they could still come home? If the Biba's children had already been killed, why wasn't their fate disclosed? Why wasn't there a mission to recover their remains? Now, they claim that they knew this, or at least suspected this, that they were killed by them. That's not what happened. Recently, they claimed that back in November, right? Not that the forensics necessarily proved that. That was what part of what they claimed with no evidence and no one's even seen that, but that they said that they had insight into that. So why did they even let them believe it for a second? The family's calling this out, by the way. Now it says, did Israel's leadership believe that keeping the Biba's children in public consciousness would sustain international pressure for hostage negotiations? Their innocent faces stirred up deep emotions. They used them. Was their image used to keep the hostage issue at the forefront, even when officials may have known the grim reality? It says the drawn-out agony surrounding the Biba's family fate only compounded that suffering. Did Israel's need to wait 16 months? Did Israelis need to wait 16 months clinging to a false hope? But there's more. Blinken failed to secure the release of the Biba's children. Yet within days of their capture, the Biden administration managed to bring home 2 American women. Right? So the obvious point is, well, why wouldn't that be immediately included? Well, because they were already killed. And they refused. They don't want them. That was never wanted from either side, from the U.S. or Israeli side. It says, if Biden could secure the release of 2 American women through Qatari mediation, why not 2 toddlers? Why weren't they prioritized from day one? That's pretty easy to point out. According to report, and this is Israeli media, again, according to reports from the IDF and the National Center for Forensic Medicine, the Biba's children were murdered by Hamas in November, meaning on October 20th, when they were released, they could have come home too. Now, technically what I was saying there is not true because the point is they were negotiating about this when they were technically still alive. My point is later in the negotiations that came afterward, they were keeping them alive. They were pretending like they were alive, but then never were part of the discussion. That's pretty clear. That's what a point I was kind of making. This point is important to think about. So if Blinken and them are discussing and then getting two American women released when they were still alive, why weren't they part of the conversation? It's very clear. The answer is transparent. They were being used. It was important to Israel to use this family. And now we see that playing out. Before that, though, while this all breaks down, which is, by the way, why I think they really didn't lean into it as much as they needed to for the ceasefire violation, instead making it about some music, the humiliating releases, seems like the smaller choice, doesn't it? Clearly to claim they violated I think the point was to get outraged about the Biba family exchange and the fact that they were dead when they were told they wouldn't be. That didn't happen. Why else would they keep that going so long? But my point is, as that's all happening, and we can see that they're still maintained to the point where the father and the family are even calling out Israel now, Reuters comes out with this fact check. It's not about the fact check. It's about the fact that this is being circulated. A headline on Hamas, quote, protecting the Biba's family is fake. So this is a fake BBC article that says, Hamas just wanted to protect the Biba's family, but Israel killed them, Hamas said. So you see how easy, this is typical Zionist propaganda for me. So they know you're seeing this. So what they want to do, whoever they is, the hierarchy enslaving you, because it doesn't have to be Israel, somebody who wants to convince you that this is not the case, they come out with the same narrative in a very, very lazy, clumsy, they put out a fake statement from Hamas so they can come out and go fake, and then they use that fact check of a fake statement to claim that what we're saying isn't true, even though this is fake and what we're saying is true. It works today. People fall for it because they listen to their mainstream alternative media, trusted people. Now, here, I want to play just this first part of this to make that point about who took them. Here is Marco Rubio interviewing with corporate media, telling you something false immediately.
Secretary Rubio, thank you for the opportunity. As we sit down today, Hamas has released the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages, said to include a mother and 2 children. Your thoughts?
Where they start. An interview about the new administration, about the United States, and that's where they start. It's just priceless. I shouldn't even say, because this is a serious conversation. I'm in no way, you know me by now, especially if you know this platform. If you don't, that's in no way to diminish the suffering of the family, what happened to those children, the devious, disgusting crime that it was being taken in the first place, not by Hamas, by the Mujahideen Brigade, as well as the devious murder, whether indiscriminate bombing or otherwise, by Israel of those children. No one should be belittling any of that. And whoever took them, clearly Mujahideen Brigade, according to everybody, should be held accountable for that. Here's how he answers.
I think it's a reminder of who Hamas really is. Just think about the fact they went in, they grabbed this family, this young woman, her 2 infant children. I think one was only 4 years old, the other one was 1. And then, and it's not just that they did it and that they died in their captivity. Who does that? Who kidnaps families? And then the way
Israel, literally every day, by the way. But I guess we're not talking about that.
That they were released, with people cheering in the streets. It just tells you who we're.
Yeah, do we really need to make this point every single time? Obviously, the comparable point is what maniac Zionists are doing every time this stuff happens, or the many different publicly stated comments they make about why none of them should be alive. None of it's defendable, guys. None of it. It's about how they only like to criticize one side of it while anybody honest is doing both.
Dealing with Hamas. This is not a government. This is not simply an ideological movement. These are evil, terrible people. And the idea that they would ever be allowed to continue to have arms, to be militarized, and to control territory anywhere in the world is unfathomable. So
yeah, right. Israel, they should. Oh, we're talking about Israel for a second. No, obviously the point is, why do you have any say in that? Now, even if they were exactly what you say they were, the idea that they get to dictate who does and doesn't have things shows you who they think they are. They don't have any right to say what country, what ruler. Like, so if we're going to pretend back to the point that they were actually allowed to vote these people in, which I still don't believe, well, that means it doesn't matter how bad you think they are who they chose. So you don't believe in democracy then. Okay, as long as it's only a democracy if we like the outcome is not how that works. But then realize Israel funded Hamas right up until October 7th. That's for this little Marco Rubio knows that. Or the bigger point that I'm actually making, they weren't taken by Hamas. I mean, so the father was taken by Hamas, the Hamas had the father, right? Why were they in two separate places? I mean, I don't even play a game. They were not taken by Hamas. They were taken by the Mujahideen Brigade. It's publicly stated, but yet he then just makes it about Hamas because he has marching orders. That's the way you start this disgusting interview because it's all propaganda. It is, let's lay out the narrative on what we want people to think going forward. Now, this gets even worse. And this is actually reported from today. I think it's the first time it came out. They're now publicly. So everything we just showed you, how that built into right now, Israel cuts off Gaza aid to pressure Hamas to accept new ceasefire proposal. I mean, why do we even have to argue about this stuff? You cut off aid to mostly civilians, including the hostages you claim you're trying to help, to pressure Hamas, a group you fund, and maybe still funded, maybe still do, to accept a new thing in the midst of an agreement you both made. That's Israel violating the deal. That's all that is. There's no way around that, guys. And that's not even what they did before this. Well, they did many times before this. But the last point, they have not released their side of the last release. They took theirs and never released their side of it. If they were upset about the previous humiliating dynamic, why'd they then take their people first and then violate? Well, obviously, because they wanted their part of it. They're dishonest people, guys. I mean, this needs to be public knowledge in every context.
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures. I've been in the government too long to know that the Israelis are patent liars.
So they lie about this. They violate the deal many times. Then, per the plan we've been telling you for a month or 2 months, they violated it right in the point they were supposed to. And blame Hamas like they were supposed to. Now, the Prime Minister of Israel account says, with the conclusion of the first state. No, that didn't happen. You never met your part of the last aspect of it. With the conclusion of the first stage of the hostage deal, and in light of Hamas's refusal to accept the Witkoff framework for the continuation of the talks. See, this is actually not that. This is better formulated than what I've been seeing over the last year, but still pretty lazy for those that are even paying attention, which is they're trying to conflate so basically right now, which is, by the way, this is actually important. When this first came out, one of the main criticisms was, why did they then have this middle deep discussion? Why didn't they just have a ceasefire that came to conclusion? They added it because they knew they would give Israel this out. So they created a situation where they had the exchange. Then they were supposed to discuss what phase 2 would be in the middle of it. And then that would lead to an end. That was the ridiculous, incongruent dynamic. And here we are, right? So they're conflating that as if Hamas is refusing to discuss phase 2 with the fact that what they're actually asking them to do is discuss the extension of phase 1. We just showed you that. It's very public. They know what they're doing, guys, and dishonest people pretend they don't see it, and dumb people fall for it. Now it says, to which Israel agreed. Well, it doesn't matter what you agreed to because you're talking about an extension, a alteration of an ongoing ceasefire agreement that you both agreed to. That's not how this works. It says, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided, as of this morning, because of your fake construct, entry of all goods supplies to Gaza will be halted. Now, it doesn't matter what preceded that statement, just like I didn't the first time. That's a crime. Unequivocal. There are, I don't even know anymore, to be honest, before all this, millions of Palestinians. Half of them women and children, and they are starving and hurting all of them. But this is not new. This never stopped. They're just proudly saying it again, basically taunting all of us. Now it says, Israel will not allow a ceasefire without the release of our hostages. Are you kidding me? This is almost making fun of you while they do it. You didn't release your part of the last segment. And because you forced new agreements on them in the midst of the first phase, you now say that you won't allow a ceasefire without because what they're basically doing now, because Trump gave them the leeway, is they said, just give us everybody back or we're not going to do this anymore. It is belligerent. If Hamas persists in its refusal, which is where all of them are getting their headline from, there will be additional consequence. What, like more genocide? Probably. Well, Assault Rod points out, remember how many months Biden's officials spent telling you that Israel wasn't deliberately blocking aid? Yet somehow Israel can turn off the switch on and off whenever they choose. This is an open public declaration of the intent to commit a war crime. And for the podcast, she's simply highlighting what we just read. Aviva Klampus, of course, one of the propagandists, comes out and says this. Hamas says Israel's decision to stop sending aid into Gaza is a war crime. Okay, just to be clear, no matter what preceded it, no matter what the narrative is, like I said, it is. Period. But here's how she follows it up. And this is how, people get tricked. She said, that's right. The people who took babies hostage and then murdered them are giving a lecture on war crimes. Well, it wasn't Hamas and they didn't murder them. But, don't let the facts get in the way of your narrative. But the point is irrelevant. Even if it was Hamas, they did kill them. It does not change the fact that stopping food ate 2 people, including your people. I feel like we're arguing with the phantom at this point. Is anybody confused about this? Tell me the truth. This is ridiculous. These people are absolute monsters. She knows what she's doing. These are soulless people, guys. How in the world you could possibly be like this and act like you have any goodness in you? Ryan Grimm makes it obvious here, just so we're clear. Announcing that you will starve a civilian population, both your hostages and everybody else, in order to alter the terms of a ceasefire deal, by the way, that's already been signed and agreed to, is a flagrant war crime of the highest order. You would not know that from U.S. headlines. Barak Ravid, another propagandist for Israel, first 8 hours before this says, Israel halts aid shipments after ceasefire expires? Expires? What? See, this is like fun. You can't even be consistently dishonest about it. You have to basically throw out different variations like strangled with your bare hands or beat them with your bare hands or, whatever, bare hands. Just remember the bare hands. That's whatever narrative you take, make it about them murdering them with the most, how exactly do you prove that with forensics to 15 months? Nobody honest is buying any of this, guys. Well, he follows it up saying the Trump administration backed the Israeli decision. Oh, I'm so shocked. No evidence, no investigation, just whatever they said, good, go with it. White House National Security Council spokesman Brian Hughes told me, quote, Israel has negotiated in good faith since the beginning of this administration to ensure the release of hostages held captive by Hamas terrorists. Oh, have they? Ignoring the 75 different violations of the ceasefire, honest engagement. We will support their decision on the next steps, given Hamas has indicated it no longer interested in the negotiated ceasefire. No, in fact, quite the opposite. They've publicly stated they want this to continue and that they will not deviate from the agreement. And the dishonest Trump administration, or rather the dishonest U.S. government, all sides of it, continue to gaslight for a genocide-committing monster of a government. Simple. Well, if you want to take it a step back, actually, and recognize that this is not new, and this is one of many examples, this one just happens to be part of the government, but you'll see it all over, especially on this platform. Palestine Online highlights that after Israel announced the halt of aid into Gaza, Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, his name is Nissim Vaturi, publicly called for bombing food supplies in Gaza. Have the gates of hell opened, bomb the food supplies that have already been brought into Gaza. That's what he said. Here's Sarah Wilkinson giving you the translated, highlighted. Now, it's in the Hebrew version of Twitter, so it's more difficult to find. It says, on his Twitter account, Israeli Deputy Speaker of the Knesset calls to bomb the food warehouses in Gaza to destroy life-saving aid. Okay, it doesn't matter the rash. That is a crime, no matter what narrative. They don't care. They really don't care. And your government's either okay with that because they agree or they are compromised. Now, Ryan Grimm also points out, and this is in the context of what else they're keeping out of Gaza and have been the entire time, Every time you hear an Israeli official, he says, say they support, quote, transfer of Palestinians out of Gaza for, quote, humanitarian reasons, remember that they are currently blocking doctors from going in and blocking sick and dying patients from leaving. Drop site news from a Human Rights Watch article from this February 2025. Israeli authorities block healthcare workers from entering Gaza. That's not new. It's been there like everything else from the beginning. In fact, well before October 7th. Israeli authorities are blocking vital medical professionals and medications from entering Gaza and simultaneously preventing wounded Palestinians from leaving. Remember that whole point of Trump talking about, in the Egyptian president talking about getting, was it Egypt? I forget who. Oh, Jordanian president talking about getting out those sick cancer patients. How'd that go? Anybody follow up on that? Or we just let the narrative fly with no investigation? It says, deliberately denying life-saving care for thousands of Palestinians. Human Rights Watch. Drop site news. Mohammed Shihada, and this is such a great example of the kick the can down the road propaganda, another kind of way they do this, not just reactive and clumsy, but it's kind of both, actually. So here you've got Smotrich, one of the most disgusting people in this conversation, who is using the fact that they displaced these people from other parts of Palestine to make the argument they're not even from Gaza. You can't even believe the amount. I mean, I don't even know how to frame this properly. Is it this guy? Is he so deluded by his own Zionist propaganda? Or is he just this stupid? You decide for yourself. He said, it says, incredible to see Israeli leaders shamelessly admitting 75% of Gazans, so many of them are actually from these areas, local areas, or specifically that they're currently being forced to stay in. But incredible to see that admitting 75% of the people in that forced location, whom Israel kicked out of Haifa, Tiberias, Acre, I'm probably mispronouncing some of these, Jaffa, and stole their homes. One of the most documented part of this whole conversation, despite their flailing what's the word I'm looking for? Dismissal, or just acting like it's not the reality, even though there's more evidence around this than anything. Some of these people still have literal keys to these houses. But here's what he says. I heard the Spanish foreign minister, because they've been calling this out for a while, and understand the ignorance. I heard him say that you can't do this. For 75%, he says, of Gaza's population, it's not their homeland. He says, do you know what their homeland is? He's trying to tap into what they're doing to Israelis. Like Benjamin Netanyahu being from Poland, not an Israeli, or, not from the local area that they've made into Israel, even though it's occupied Palestine. He goes, you know what their homeland is? Haifa, Tiberias, Acre, I think it's Acre. Let me know in the chat. Or Jaffa. Places, by the way, you can literally prove. Oh, and he says it right here. He goes, this is a refugee population. Yeah, you're right. That has been there since 1948. Well, remind me, Smotrich, what else happened in 1948? The Nakba. That's right. So what's incredible about this? They're pretending. Why? Haven't you heard Cotton and the rest of these Zionist morons in Congress go, why do we have to keep giving them aid? He just told you, because they're refugees from 1948. I mean, how many ways? This is what I always talk about. They're using the average ignorance of people, even though what they're pointing to is what they did. It's like Netanyahu and Trump talking about why Gaza's destroyed and how who's going to want to live there? You did all of that. Like we are just in an unprecedented position, guys, where I'd really like to believe that most people can see all of this. That's what I think. But it seems to keep happening. Now, CNN and all the rest of them, Fox and everybody else, Israel stops humanitarian aid into Gaza after Hamas rejects extending ceasefire's first phase. At the very least, they framed the first phase part of it correctly. But what you're looking for is Israel violates the ceasefire. That's just crazy. And Muhammad says, disgusting propaganda. Hamas never rejected extending the ceasefire's first phase. Well, it's a kind of a philosophical, I guess, just a deep. The point is, the ceasefire was an agreement. Israel's trying to change that in the middle of the agreement. So you could argue it's correct to say they didn't reject anything because there's not even a point of rejection. Israel's trying to deviate from the agreement. That's the point. But if you want to argue that Israel tried to deviate it and Hamas is rejecting that effort, that's what I'm saying. But I get his point. There's nothing to reject if there's not pretending like there's not some new ceasefire. Israel violated it by pretending like they get to add new details in the midst of a thing before they even met their side of it. So I get his point in pushing back on that. But the reality is they did say what you're doing is not even applicable to the conversation. Now, let me see this. Oh, well, here's a part that I'm going to go ahead and take his word for this, since this is something he's really, I mean, the point is, I don't know if this is exactly accurate. Here's what he says. The agreement states phase 1 should be automatically extended indefinitely as long as phase 2 negotiations are ongoing. I don't remember that, but it makes sense to me, because my point at the time was this is where you knew this would blow up. So let's follow up on that. Make a note of that out there. Let's make sure that's correct. But I would argue it most likely is. Question everything. Don't assume. But the idea being that either way you look at it, that what they're doing is a deviation from what would be expected. They're just going, we're new things, or you didn't do your thing, even though all of that's not true. And especially if it should be automatically extended, well, now that becomes even more clear that what they did was a violation in and of itself. Zachary Foster, PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton, says CNN declares itself guilty of incitement to genocide by repeating lies of the Israeli military rather than doing journalism. Left and right, it's all the same. Now, the funding is the worst part of all this. I would have started with this if this was some kind. We've already seen 7.4. We've already seen 3. Trump has been sending billions. 1 billion right out of the gate when they pretended they slashed $1 billion from spending. Interesting overlap. Then 7.4 billion right about the time when they claim they slashed a bunch more billions. Interesting overlap. It's almost like they're cutting DEI funding to dump money into Israel's hands. And apparently now that they can just have direct access to the purse strings, we don't get to hear about it anymore. I'm kind of being facetious. I think that's probably what's happening. The point is they just sent another, $4 billion. 12 Ball says they've been in office for less than 2 months and have already approved, I think it's like 13 billion in arms for Israel. This new expedited $4 billion is separate from the $3 billion they already sent. And guess what they're doing? They're using the state of emergency. So guess what, guys? The emergency we declared for the border is now being used to send Israel money, or some variation therein. They did not do what they said they were going to do. And they've used these extra powers to go after other things, as we already showed you. Surprise, surprise. Now, if you're honest out there, you'd be calling this out. This was the one from February 9th. Trump sending $7.4 billion in just weapons to Israel. And as he pointed out, there was the $3 billion before that. There was the $1 billion before that. That's where we are. Now, drop site news. This is reported today. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is the 28th. Oh, I'm sorry. This is about the previous funding to include, and then this one we're going to get into the current today. This is from the military assistance to Israel under the guise of an emergency. Really? An emergency? But so this is from the 28th of February. Drop site news. The Trump administration has bypassed Congress to approve an emergency $2.04 billion. So this is the same thing that keeps happening. If you can just go emergency and just ignore, which by the way, Biden or even before that in Trump's last administration, they don't even feign to care about Congress, right? They just make things happen, declare bomb certain areas. So why there's more overlap to what this is, who knows? The point is, there's been a long time since they've cared about Congress approval for just about anything. Probably because of Israel's influence, in my opinion, but you can decide for yourself. This is pointing out this has already happened. Bypass Congress to approve $2.4 billion arms sales to Israel, fast-tracking the transfer of tens of thousands of bombs while they're breaking both U.S. and international law. Whether by funding groups like the Azov movement or any other things. They're violating human rights laws, violating international law, committing a genocide. Every one of these violate U.S. law on the books for whether they're allowed to fund these people. But don't forget, Trump removed those human rights restrictions. So we're good then, right? Anyway, you want to explain to me why that's a good thing, fighting the deep state by removing restrictions that go to funding deep state characters or people murdering children? But it says the deal includes, it goes on a list of what they're giving them. More MK-84, M2, all these different bombs you've seen used. The one that killed the bus full of children in Yemen. Those are your merchants of death, guys. That's what you're funding. So that was the last one. $3.101 billion. Without congressional approval because emergency, right? Well, it is an emergency because without this, Israel couldn't keep genociding children. So they had to step up, right? Glenn Greenwald, this is today, reports, well, actually Michael Tracy reports, what emergency is happening at the moment that requires expediting $4 billion in military subsidies to Israel. Isn't there supposed to be a solid, enduring ceasefire underway? I mean, guys, think about how crazy that is. In the midst of this, rolling back this very ceasefire they claim was up in the air, they're funding them. And you think this happened today? This is something they've been doing. So the point is they knew they were going to violate this. They don't think I know we are smart enough to see that. They don't think you're smart enough to see that. Prove them wrong. That's how they think so little of you. They think you're just going to expect because they posted it today that this, realize how many points of how many evidence points we've already shown you that indicate we already knew this would happen. Military aid to Israel, March 1st. Right? So this is posted on the 2nd. March 1st is when it went out. His point is, at this moment, there was no real deviation from the ceasefire. And they were already emergency funding weapons for the beginning of the next phase. Not phase 2, next phase of the genocide. It says, I have signed a declaration to use emergency authorities. See how that cat's out of the bag. To expedite the delivery of $4 billion. The decision to reverse the Biden administration's partial arms embargo. So again, the simple game is Biden, Democrat, did it bad. Therefore, we doing it good. I don't know how we can be this stupid. Whoever, Biden or anybody else, the point was a pretend embargo because they actually kept funding them. But the game was, not the game, the reality was they were violating the law. So they had to go, well, they did do this. Those settlers were killing people and they'd burn those people alive and those rapes over here. So pretend embargo. They don't even care. They pulled up, they said, remove that. We're funding them no matter what. That's what Trump is at least good for, is showing you, pulling that mask off. Now it says, which wrongly withheld a number of weapons and ammunition from Israel. Wrongly. Since taking office, Trump administration's approved $12 billion. Now, it's again, if you add it up, it's a little bit more than that. And he's proudly telling you that. Weren't we supposed to be saving money? Wasn't it supposed to be the peace president? You tell me which promise has been violated. I'll show you all of them. The Trump administration will continue to use all available tools to fulfill America's long-standing commitment to Israel's security. Does Israel do anything for our security other than undermine it? Including means to counter security threats. It's just so obvious, guys. And as Glenn Greenwald said, wherever the Israeli government says it wants something, it automatically becomes an emergency in Washington to prioritize that demand above all other goals and get Israel everything it demands, or even more than what they demand, as soon as possible. And in case you don't understand it, the same thing happened with Biden or Obama or anybody else. Now, if you can't by now see what that shows you, I don't think you want to. All other goals, everything, whatever America first, Israel, that first. Prioritize Israel, he says. Pam Bondi comes out and makes a task force to go after October 7th. Right away, America first. You got to be able to call this out. Now, as David Icke rightly points out, making a joke of the Doge efficiency point, AIPAC tracker says Trump now approved $10.4 billion in weapons for Israel. No, and that's, again, everyone's doing their own math. 7.4 plus 3 plus 4 more, plus whatever else is happening that we don't see, by the way. But for just since taking office, 7. He's just adding up the last two, 7.4 and then 3 plus this 4 plus another billion to begin with. That's my point. So $1 billion went right away. Then there was 7.4. Then there was 3. Now there's 4 more. It's whatever. I think that's what, 13, 14 billion. So he's saying urgent, urgent, urgent. Calling Doge and Elon Musk. I have some corruption and waste to report. Why are you not answering the phone? Yeah, good point. Because this isn't the corruption and spending they're worried about. They're trying to create the illusion that giving them everything they need is somehow saving you from everything. As long as he posted on Twitter and he shares a funny meme that day, we're all good. We've saved the democracy, right? Now, Mario Nawfal, this is how he frames it. Well, here's what's interesting, actually. This is the older one, February 28th. Trump approves $3 billion in arms sales. The Trump administration just fast-tracked $3 billion in weapons to Israel, bypassing Congress for the emergency. Deal includes 35,500 bombs. Oh, there's one he cited in here too. 24th, even before that. Trump kills oversight on U.S. weapons, no questions asked. No, you'd think he might have some critical reporting as a journalist of the new media, right? For years, the U.S. was required to report on if the bombs were breaking the law, if it was violating international law. Israel was meant to target. Israel was the main target, but the rule applied to all U.S. partners. Not anymore. Trump just wiped the books. Senator Chris Hollins said the move was shameful. That's it. I mean, at least he cites somebody saying it's bad, but see, the game there is to go Democrats said bad, so we should all assume good. You're kidding me? You're going to remove oversight on international law because bombs and weapons, and I mean, for a genocide committing country? It is wild what people are doing. That just keeps going back. They just keep cycling through. Look, it's a game, guys. Look at that. You can keep going back, and they keep captioning the previous one. And most of these, look, U.S. freezes most foreign aid for first time ever. No, they didn't. The vast majority of the aid that was going to Ukraine, Israel, or the places where it needed to continued. It was an illusion, and we already showed you that. Ukraine didn't even stop. That was also a lie, as we went to right afterward. Or the USAID dynamic. They simply reshuffle things around, but don't expect to get that from them. We are the media now. But that's how we highlighted it. David Icke says, this is the man who only wants peace, right? You're worshiping an Israel-owned, cult-owned fraud of such a monumental proportions, MAGA, that you have to catch your breath. The cult is destroying the old cult order to bring in the new one founded on total human control by AI, right, Elon? And you call it 5D chess, and you cheer, and you eulogize your jailers. God help the kids. Rob BD, says, David, I love you and to shreds and always will, but I don't think anyone will ever pass your purity test. You have a lot to say, and I'll keep listening. Well, he's being kind, but purity test? Funny enough, James Corbett's going to be coming out with a documentary. I just sent him what I was doing. It might be too late. I hope I didn't, miss the mark, but it's about black pill, white pill, the real picture. I'm not going to go into what I said because, I'm repeating it, but this is something we all picked up on. Purity test, black pill. It was all right before the selection process. Most of it framing people that are simply going, think for yourself. Don't trust any of them. Don't look for a hero. It's like, you're black pilled. No, that's the white. I mean, again, my opinion is that, I kind of pointed out, is that both of them are inaccurate, right? Both of them are hyperbolic side. Really, it's about the term itself. Whatever you want to make up a term for it. It's about finding the path for yourself. You are your own savior. The white pill represents a part where you're like, well, it's all good. It'll work out. They'll figure it. Give them time. Black pill being, no, we're all doomed no matter what. Like, I think both of them are the extremes. The reality is none of them are there to fight for you. Fight for yourself. That's my opinion. But purity test. I mean, what are you talking about, a purity test? You're talking, what that is the of cult of personality. You're defending a personality. Because all he's highlighting is his opinion about the fact that, what you can see happening is clear, but that they're involved with basically tricking you and rolling that out. I don't even understand how purity test applies right there, but it's just, it's a, like we said, black pill purity test. That's the new, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's dismiss this without further thought. And that seems to be applied a lot of places. Now, this is the new one. U.S. fact tracks 4 billion. Don't expect to see any real criticism because nobody is going, these people are blindly walking along. Israel threatens to resume war as ceasefire deal breaks down. They are just parroting. It's amazing. New media, you're just parroting what the government says. You are parroting what Israel says without any real deviation. It's just crazy. And this person has 2 million followers. Michael Tracy makes a good point. This is back from February 25th. When he goes, in the Doge spirit of shrinking the size of government, House GOP just passed a budget resolution calling for $100 billion in additional military spending. I just pointed at something they were saying about, Rubio in a clip was saying the war-focused agenda. Like, how is that war peacetime? Like, what are we talking about? You are shifting us into a war focus because that's what's coming. Always has been from either administration. But $100 billion in additional spending for military is not what we're being told. Neither peace president nor slashing spending for the obvious bloated Pentagon budget. But it says Trump and GOP, this is from the 26th, are pushing a budget that they freely acknowledge will explode the deficit by hundreds of billions of dollars this year. Doge, therefore, cannot possibly be about restoring fiscal responsibility or whatever. It's a fig leaf for imposing other ideological priorities. Now, that's his opinion, but I agree with that last part in particular. Like, that's just like me saying it's a new flavor. It's the same problem in a different flavor, but it's different, so we can act like we stopped the DEI funding and so on. Well, good. I'm glad that stopped. But if you're simply deviating into a new version of the same kind of manipulation, to me, it's the same problem. Anybody honest and nonpartisan, it's the same manipulation. But the other part about it is, I mean, you could argue that they might find a way to slash more and somehow come out on top when I find that really impossible to believe. But to me, it's not just about slashing things. It's about what and how you get there. Right? And in this case, if you're passing a bill that's only going to increase the problem and just slash different programs, I mean, we're not really succeeding at the end of the day. Now, lastly, like I said, I was going to include earlier, just want to include this for you. Sarah Wilkins had put this out yesterday. It's only a minute and 21 seconds, but the point is, guys, if you don't understand by now, this is my article about this, or show, June 18th, the undeniable reality of October 7th foreknowledge and the Hannibal directive. Now, there's been a lot that's developed since this show, but it was provable at the time. Not that we knew exactly what happened, but that there was people stood down. There was so much foreknowledge that is impossible to wrap your mind around, and that they just didn't know it was coming. So this is another clip that came out, another documentary. It says a new report details further evidence that the Hannibal directive was activated. Israelis were targeted by and killed by Israel, not Palestinians. Now, the clear reality is you could prove that there was there were people killed by whether Palestinians, Islamic Jihad, or other Palestinians that were there. That's undeniable. As, like, for example, Mujahideen Brigade took the Biba's children. These things are crimes. It matters, to be honest about that. The point, though, is that you can now prove that I think the clear majority of the death was because of what they did. The evidence abounds, guys. It's unreal how much you can prove. The cars they bombed, everything. The evidence showing that they were using people as human shields at the festival, that they moved the festival so it would be in the path. Over and over and over. But watch it for yourself. And all that is to end with is to recognize if they're willing to sacrifice their own people for the agenda, how do we not see what they're doing in honesty right now? That they're willing to sacrifice everything, including the country itself. These people have lost the plot. And these people are the ones that seem to be driving this country into the ground for their benefit. As always, all I want is for you to at least ask the question: does the evidence back up this theory, this thesis, the consideration of what we might see happening? And if not, then good. At least you considered it. Keep it in mind. Maybe come to your conclusion about what you think the evidence does add up to. What I think is pretty clear is it does not add up to what we're being told is happening. And I'll end with this clip that I played before. In fact, I might play both of them in a row because they're both short, I think. But I put this out November 29th, 2023. Netanyahu has been maliciously influencing the U.S. government for decades, all while pushing for Americans to die for Zionist agenda. None of these wars have been in the interest of Americans. So we'll leave it there. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. I can't tell you for sure whether I'll be doing a show tomorrow, but I'm really focused on trying to get back to a routine and, just trying to keep more. As always, it's really just about my mind going. My mind goes crazy when I can't get to, I miss you guys. I miss being here and talking with everybody. And even though we're not conversing, but just, the community of all of it. And it's important to recognize that there's a lot of people out there that see what you're talking about. Just like with COVID, you're not alone. I honestly think you're the majority. So think about that. Consider what we discussed today. Share the information. Clip out the show. And we need your support, as always. It's never ending what we're going through, the attacks, suppression. But really, that's all side notes. If you believe in what we're doing and you believe in the work we're trying to create, if you see value in what we're putting forward for free, right, then demonstrate that to me. Show us what you think this is worth. Because it won't continue if we don't have enough support. Not in the way we want to see this going. As I said in the past, even though it's kind of counterintuitive to the point, I'm going to do this whether it's on my phone or my room. This is important to me to get the information out. But because of you guys, we are graced by your support to be able to have somewhere like this that we can broadcast. But Every day we're getting kicked back. 2 steps back, 1 step forward, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's always a process. So with your support, hopefully we can keep pushing, because I see that we are making a difference. What you're doing right now, you are making a difference. The comments you're making, we are changing people's opinions, guys. You can see it. And nothing terrifies them more. Objective, nonpartisan questioning. So thank you for being here, guys. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
If you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how do it...
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The answer is categorically yes. The 2 nations that are competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. But a 3rd nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. So you have here now 3 nations.
All stand together to stop Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror. I know that no matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel.
This starts, and it's really fascinating to go back. It starts in 1996 with Netanyahu, who wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism. And the thesis of the book is quite straightforward and very dangerous. He says, there's Hamas, there's Hezbollah, they oppose Israel. It's not good for us to fight them directly. That won't work. What we need to do is topple the governments that back them. So what we need is regime change throughout the Middle East. And he actually gave a long list of 7 countries that included Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, and Lebanon. And systematically, the United States has done Netanyahu's bidding for almost 30 years now, going to war with every one of them except for the big one that Netanyahu so much longs for, which is the war directly between the United States and Iran.